Hello and welcome to episode 136 of the Crate and Crowbar. It's the 12th of April. I am here... Wait, I'm Tom Francis, and I'm here with...
Chris Thurston, sorry, what?
And...
Tom Senior.
And the news this week is that Titanfall 2 was announced.
Yeah, it was, with a very brief,
very
meaningless
trailer.
Little diatribe about heroism or something. Because all games must be announced with an anonymous man talking sort of distantly about what it might mean to be in a big robot or something. The answer, we don't know. But the robot's got a sword now.
He says you shouldn't be a hero because you'll live longer. But it's like a huge amount of dramatic build-up and loads of long pauses to just say like an old cliche.
Yeah.
There was
really relate to it.
There was a jungle, there was a drop pod. I wonder if that's a mechanic of some kind that pilots can use.
There were drop pods in the first game.
Oh, were there?
Yeah.
Oh, in that case, they've already done that. They've got to have bigger drop pods for the sequel or something.
Well, yeah, because in the first game, those little NPC minions that spawn on the maps come in on drop pods, so
good point. Yeah.
It could just be full of minions.
Man.
Not like minions, but like...
God, that'd be a twist.
The teaser was boring, but it gave me an excuse to think about Titanfall and to remember all the cool shit I did in that game, Titanfall, and how good it was. Damn, it was good. It was so
It was really
awesome.
good.
Yeah.
It was really good, and they fucked it with the business model. Real bad.
Yeah, that community vanished real fast. And they got into some awkward positions where they realised that no one was playing CTF, and so they tried to take it out, and there was a backlash because it was on the box and it was kind of a selling point of the game, so they couldn't take it out, but they had already committed to this idea that there were going to be just rotating servers that you had to kind of drop into and drop out of, and you couldn't set up your own servers. And it was kind of awful to watch it dissolve within 6 weeks.
Yeah, because it was such a good game. It's such a good game, and then they fucked it up so badly. Like, having no custom servers or sort of, dedicated playlists or anything like that, just having, click play and you get what you get. Like one of the reasons to worry about the second game is things haven't really got much better since then. Like loads of Titanfall's ideas are present in Star Wars Battlefront, another EA game. The reason you don't necessarily notice in Battlefront is that Battlefront isn't a very good game. So you're not going like, why is this great game being hamstrung by this terrible, ethos about hyper accessible multiplayer that gives you the player no control whatsoever and melts immediately if the players leave. You don't really notice that with Battlefront, whereas with Titanfall you totally did, because you wanted to play it and you wanted to play it optimally, which was basically like CTF.
CTF was so good in that game.
It was. Yeah.
It was so good. No one played it, but it was fucking amazing. It's because you grab, in any other kind of old school shooter with flags, you just grab it and you run. But if you've got a giant robot at your beck and call, like there are so many options that you could set the robot onto like auto to follow you and kind of defend you, and while you sprint and kind of wall run off things and use your jetpack to carve these amazing paths through these levels. The traversal in that game was insanely good, like absolutely precise. It always did exactly what you wanted to do. It really kind of mantled correctly, and the wall running felt amazing. The levels were designed to allow you to kind of carve these really clever kind of acrobatic paths through them. Or you could just get into your robot with the flag and say, fuck it, it's going to missile everyone, and maybe all your pals call in robots as well at that moment and defend you, and you kind of roll out as a fucking battle unit with the flag at the centre. And damn, there were so many moments in that game, like proper kind of exciting, memorable moments that I haven't had in any other shooter. And then it died. And I was sad.
It's literally 6 weeks after it came out, no one was playing it because they'd screwed up and then, season pass, map pack, separating community stuff that people still do. It's real, it's like, almost like, I would be perfectly excited about the second game if it was literally the first game.
Without that shit.
But without that shit.
Right.
Like, exactly, then there's rumours that they're going to do a single player campaign and stuff. I don't care. I don't care. I just want that game back, but, like, with a kind, don't even call it Titanfall 2. Just do what they're doing with Mirror's Edge and call it Mirror's Edge or something. Don't call it Mirror's Edge. That would be confusing. But like, just pretend the first game never happened. Show up with this thing called Titanfall. Isn't it great? Isn't it amazing that we're going to support a competitive community with like custom servers and private lobbies and a proper ranked system and all this sort of thing. Oh, and wow, all the maps will be free, but we'll charge you for skins like in Rainbow Six Siege and all this stuff. Yeah. That'd be great.
It's like, do you want a pink robot? pay a few quid for a pink robot. There are so many opportunities for kind of, for visual customization with your character and your robot that, it's such a good thing. And it's so, like, their approach was so antithetical to how people share, experiences with games now, which is Twitch, which is GIFs, which is all that stuff that, you know, if you want to build an audience and you want to organize competitive matches between teams that are organized and good, and the game literally did not facilitate that. You couldn't pick a map. You couldn't just say, you couldn't get, you know, the right people into the same server and just, you know, create an event that other people could buy into and watch. There was no way to do that. And it's mad. It's so mad that for that game, those decisions were made to not allow that stuff. When it's so fun to watch. I would watch Titanfall forever.
Yeah, so would I. Yeah.
It's looks incredible. It has these moments of, just this really interesting pacing to it where the choice of when you call down your Titans and whether you hold off and that kind of thing would be really interesting in a competitive context. And just simply watching people running and vaulting and doing these incredible maneuvers.
And loads of great little sort of storytelling through multiplayer ideas. And I don't mean necessarily the campaign stuff, which was weird. But like, when you have like, after you lose a mission, you then have to retreat via dropship. And your opponents just get more points if the more of you they kill on the way out. And like the dropship, and after that point, you don't respawn. So if you die on the way to the dropship, you're just dead. The dropship can be destroyed, which, you know, it gives the enemy team loads of points. They watch it explode. So for the enemy team, it's like, this, you won. So your reward is getting to shoot all your opponents as they flee for the dropship. And for the losing team, it's like, you lost, but here's like sort of dramatic escape sequences. You're like parkouring through buildings and you leap off the top of one robot and then dive into the dropship as it jumps to hyperspace and then you're in space. Like all that stuff. Like,
it was so good.
Sounds great.
It was fucking good.
There was something like that at the end of a match of Battlefield 2142. You were trying to destroy these huge hovering mothership things, and you had to go in and destroy the core, and then it would like blow up after 30 seconds or whatever. And by the time, once you destroyed the core, you'd already won the match, so nothing could go wrong from that point. But you also had the chance to try and escape the ship before it happened. And because it's just floating in space, that just meant running to the, you know, to the surface of it and then just throwing yourself off. And so the end of the match would always be everyone, like winning and losing teams, just throwing themselves off this, off this huge thing.
Games, yeah, like there are ways of incorporating like little moments of drama like that, not scripted, but like with some sort of pre-planned beats into multiplayer stuff in a way that's really, really super cool. But don't then sell a subsequent 40 quid season pass that's mandatory if you want to keep playing with everyone else in the community, because then you've fucked it.
It's going to happen though, isn't it?
I hope not.
Do you think?
I hope not. The worry is...
They must have learned something. They must have looked at what happened and thought, oh, well, that was a failure for some reason.
Battlefront, which has the same business model, like, you know, actually, Rainbow Six Siege, which I would say is like the best FPS after Titanfall, like, has a lot of the same things in it, actually, in terms of, I mean, it's like a very, very different game, but it has some of the same sort of brilliant qualities, like great creating moments where you're like, oh, I remember this crazy combination of things happen. That game has exactly the right business model, which is there is a season pass. Season pass gives you access to new characters and maps a week early, but they are free for everybody. And then on top of that, you get like loads of exclusive skins as they come out and stuff like that. So like the season pass is there and probably fulfills the business requirements of a season pass, but I mean, ostensibly it's worth a lot less because, you know, because you're not getting stuff that no one else gets.
Yeah.
But they're not destroying the community with it, which is
maybe
a big deal.
They don't care about fostering community. Maybe they're happy for shooters to be a 6-month affair where they pull people in with a season pass and they sell lots of people £80 product and then it dies out.
That'd be sad, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be sad, Chris. But from a business perspective, maybe it's cost effective to do that rather than to foster a community and support it over a period of many years.
But could they just not?
I know.
Could they just not be dicks about it? Like,
yeah.
Because Ubisoft are actually now trying to get into esports, so they're trying to launch Rainbow Six as an esport, which is great. And, you know, it's the kind of thing they can only do because they decided to give the game the tools necessary in order to do that.
Yeah.
Blizzard will do it with Overwatch as well.
Yeah.
EA are basically I guess maybe Activision as well, are the two companies left waving the flag for like really bad value shooters.
Good flag.
Yeah.
It's a shit flag.
Yeah.
That's the flag they should have removed.
So I'm very, very excited about Titanfall 2 for the game, but at the moment they announce the framework around it, I think will be the make or break point for it.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, if they are doing a single player campaign, then that becomes a lot more interesting to me. Because everything about Titanfall sounds great, except that I just don't like multiplayer games that much. I just don't like adversarial games that much. And I probably, I don't know, maybe I could have got into it if I'd been, sitting there wishing I had something to play. But when I've got loads of really cool single player stuff to play, I'm always going to go to that.
There was so much crazy stuff you could do in those. It was basically like an arena shooter, but they just added loads of extra interesting stuff you could do. Like there were these NPC mooks that were always kind of spawning onto the battlefield, and you can gain small amounts of experience for killing them. So
it's a MOBA.
Always gave you something to do. But there were robotic warriors, and you could hack them onto your own side, and they would follow you around, and you could you'd deploy these cards that would kind of make you better at it. So you could. I used to love amassing like a little cabal of hacked droids, and I'd be war running around, shotgunning guys in buildings,
and they were all running behind you. Like,
they were
like robot ducklings,
like little ducklings. It was fucking awesome, man. Phew. I'm all excited.
Like, the announcement of Titanfall 2 is just an excuse to be sad that Titanfall 1
yeah
fell on its arse quite so badly.
I think I did install it like April last year or something, just because I wanted to experience that sense of movement again and how crisp it was, and it was just depressing. Like finding a server and or just finding
running
a game
around an empty city.
Yeah, damn. Anyway, Tom, you probably had a better experience with the not deserted Resd.
Yes, I was at Resd, which is an indie game show in London, and I was showing Heat Signature there and patching Heat Signature there. So I sit there while people play, and I have my laptop out, and they play on a different computer, and then I watch them play and see what they're not understanding, and then try and update the game while they do. And I patched it 11 times, and it got much better for people like just understanding what to do.
You patched it 11 times on the fly while people were playing the game.
Over 3 days. Oh. And yeah, people understood it much better by the end of it, so that's nice.
Is it sorry, like are those changes like things that will stay in the game?
I think so. One of them was pretty experimental, which is I was talking about this just before we started recording. But when people first played the game, like you play as one of 4 or 5 factions, and the territory of the galaxy, all the space stations and trade routes and stuff, are divided roughly between those 4 or 5. So whoever you play as, you have a big chunk of territory that's yours already. And people did not get that. People didn't know that it was theirs, and they didn't know where to go to find missions. And what the answer is, you go to enemy territory. But the sort of like the difficulty of explaining all that to a player is just a whole load more text, or more kind of, however you explain it, it's going to cost a lot of time for me to develop. It's going to be clutter up the game and delay it. And so my quick solution, because I wanted to try something and then see whether it worked or not, was I just took out friendly territory. So I made it so that you don't choose a faction anymore. You're none of the factions. You just get one station, so you can buy things from the shops there. But there are no friendly ships, and everyone is your enemy. And you go out there, and like as soon as you leave your station, you're in enemy territory, because it's all enemy territory. So it's really easy to find a mission now. And that's the kind of thing where I have no idea if I'm going to stick with that. That it might be the right structure, or it might be totally wrong. But it certainly solved the problem. I got to see right away, like, oh yeah, that completely gets rid of the confusion. There's no more confusing friendly ships where you can't board them. Every ship now is something you can board. And then the other thing was like people finding missions, and I added a button where you can press it to kind of scan for nearby ships to get missions. And then also people fly like miles away from the galaxy, so there's nothing to scan. There's no ships that they could find, even if I make a really big scan radius. So I made it so that if the scan doesn't find anything by the time it's kind of like a ping circle that kind of comes out from you like a ripple in a pond. And if it gets like 75% of its radius and hasn't found anything yet, it just secretly spawns a ship and then says, oh look, I found a ship. There is. This is a bounty mission.
The
you should go and do it.
secrets of game design.
It's really fucking obvious at the moment too, because the ones it spawns, for various complicated reasons, I can't make them already be moving. I'll fix that eventually, but for now, like, they're just static. So every ship in the game is moving except the ones that it secretly spawned, and they're always at the exact same distance from you. So it's like, what was this ship doing before you found it?
I like that the players just automatically assumed that everything in the galaxy would want to kill them.
Yeah, it's fair enough.
Which is fair. All games have taught us this, but, yeah, it's quite interesting.
But yeah, the actual, like, game itself, there's just loads of little, things I needed to tweak and fix, and it was really nice to see people getting on with it better and better as the days went past. I also got some time to go and play other people's stuff, and the thing I was most eager to check out was Introversion were there, showing not just Prison Architect, but 2 new games in prototype form, and they were asking people to play both of them and then vote for which one they should make. So the two games were Wrong Wire and Scanner Sombre. Wrong Wire is a first-person bomb defusal game, which they had been working on before Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes was announced.
They must have been so furious.
Yeah. But it's single player, and it's quite different. I think Keep Talking feels like a kind of activity you do with your friends, like a sort of almost like a sport where it's kind of different every time, and you it's a challenge that you set for yourself. It's almost like a party game, I think. I haven't actually played it. But, and Wrong Wire is much more of like a single player, progressive, handcrafted puzzle game. And so every bomb is unique and custom designed. And you have like a wire cutters, not a drill, electric screwdriver, I guess. It is a drill, but with a screwdriver attachment. And I think that might be it. And you basically just have like a, briefcase bomb or something in front of you, or like some complicated mess of wires and panels and readouts. And you have to use the electric screwdriver to unscrew all the screws to take a panel off. And then you can use the wire cutters to cut wires. You have a handbook that describes sort of 4 or 5 different kinds of bombs and shows you what the layout of wires will look like. On each one, it'll tell you, like, in this one, the green wire is power and the red wire is live and the yellow wire is something else. And so you have to kind of identify that and then cut the wire. But pretty much every puzzle in it had some kind of twist on it that was tricky enough that I think I needed help on almost all of them. So there's like one has a thumb scanner, and I spent ages messing around with that before I figured out I could look around. And after I looked around, there was Chris had to tell me I could look around, and then I found a body, and it had been so long since I looked at the thumb scanner. Since then, I've been looking at these packs of TNT and these other 5 panels that I totally forgot I was trying to solve a thumb scanner. So the fact that I found a body actually didn't help me at all. I kept trying to interact with it, but there's nothing you can do to it itself. Like it's not sort of usable inherently. And the solution is to take the wire cutters and then cut the guy's thumb off so you can put it on the thumb scanner. And then, that part was I think mostly just an interaction thing. These are very early prototypes. And, I think if I'd seen that initially, I would have pieced that thing together. Like that wasn't a really interesting puzzle in itself. But then there's something after you've used the thumbprint scanner, that lets you open up a box. And then inside there's you can hack into, that's your third tool. There's some kind of like just wire thing that you plug into stuff, and it's got a digital readout on it. So you there's some mysterious circuit and you plug your thing into it, and then you get a readout of what the circuit's doing. And it had a place for me to enter codes and a list of codes that are all linked to initials, and there's loads of them. So there's it's a 4-digit code at once, and there's 8 different 4-digit codes, so you have no idea which one to enter. And because it's a bomb defusal, you don't really want to do it by trial and error. And there's a way to figure out how the thumbprint relates to which code you have to use that is really clever. That's kind of like how you would solve a problem if you were dealing with a computer system that had been rigged up in this way. That's quite logical. That I did not get. Chris had to tell me how to do it. And so, yeah, that's quite promising. I worry a bit that it's, cause I found so many things unintuitive about it, I was suggesting all these ways to fix it. And then after I suggested all the ways to fix it, I said, but of course if you fix all those, then it will just become trivially easy. So it's like, you need a game that's not intuitive, but also if it's really unintuitive, it'll be annoying. So that's a tricky problem to solve. And then the other one is Scanner Sombre, which is you start by a campfire in a cave. Again, it's first person, and you there's a tunnel leading off, but it's just pitch black, and you have a little scanner thing in your hand, and you can change its aperture size, which didn't make any sense to me at first. And then when you click the mouse, it fires out sort of thousands of little rays that whatever they hit, they make a dot on it. And the color of the dot is given by how far it is from you at the time that you fired it. So all the stuff closest to you will be red, and all the stuff furthest away from you will be green. And because it fires so many dots, it's like spraying paint all over the cave or something. But coloured by depth, so you can kind of see how far away each dot is. And so by kind of painting these dots all over the cave wall, you get a picture in 3D of what it looks like. Both these games are playable in VR, though I didn't try them in VR. And it's really beautiful. It's just like a constellation of dots. It's like stars, but, coloured across that sort of heat vision spectrum from like green to red with yellows and oranges and stuff in between. And, it's fun just to kind of be spraying these things all over the place. There's, apparently it can handle 10 million dots. And I guess after you hit your limit, it kind of starts to despawn ones, the oldest ones. But I had a really nice moment in it where, coming into, you're spraying these things around to find your way around. Sometimes you'll see like, you're spraying it on what you think is a wall, but then some of the dots go, green because they're not close to you, they're far away, and you realize, oh, that must be an opening, and then you go through the opening, and it sounds like you have to do a lot of intuition from my description, but actually in practice it's immediately obvious what the look of the cave is. As soon as there's dots on it, you can just see the depth and the shape of all of it. So you can navigate pretty easily, but you have to manually spray all over the place to kind of find your way around. And then I kind of took like a few different turnings off the main tunnel and arrived in this huge cavern that had already been scanned. And so there's dots everywhere all over it. And it's this massive open space. You can see these dots from, I think, any distance. So, you can get a sense of the whole place. And it's full of these, like, weird, outcroppings and, bits of junk. And I noticed, like, there was a thing sticking up in the middle that had this strange shape on top that looked like a sort of, so like some kind of Celtic symbol that had been broken in a particular way. And it was just a very distinctive shape. So I was kind of scanning that and moving around it to investigate it. And then I also, kind of recognized, it's just had this, because I've been playing The Witness recently, I immediately had the sense that if I moved to a certain position, this thing would line up with a similar shape in the background. And I did. And it did line up almost perfectly to like this other, basically like a shadow of the same outline. And so I was trying to figure out, is this like a weird broken item, or is it some kind of like symbol that fits in a slot? And then I realized, oh, that's probably it looks like a shadow. So it probably just is a shadow. And that means that all of the scanning particles that are illuminating this cave were fired from this direction. Like if I'm standing so that this thing perfectly fills its shadow, and I just look behind me and there's a little like scanner thing pointing up. It's like, it's not really a puzzle, but I deduced something about the environment from how it worked. It's kind of a horror. I didn't know this because when we're doing jump scares in a game where vision is completely at player's discretion, means it's very easy to miss things that are right in front of you. And so at the point when I was supposed to find something really scary in front of me, I was looking down because I was on a rope bridge and I'd spotted another rope bridge below me. So I was painting it with more dots and thinking, oh, look, I can go down there. And then jumped off the bridge and landed on the lower one and walked off. And the music was doing like this kind of ding thing. And then apparently there was something terrifying in front of me up on the bridge that I just jumped off. But Chris says he envisions that as being kind of like an hour long thing, just a short horror exploration thing. It's not very mechanicsy. It's an aesthetic mechanic. So it's like, somewhere between a painting game and an exploration game. But it's just really visually striking. It looks awesome.
It's kind of cool that they would go from a big kind of involved sim that's taken them many years to make and actually do something quite refreshing and short and quick.
I mean, they have all the money in the world.
Yeah, but they've got time, right?
Just from Prison Architect's public sales figures, it's absurdly successful and it's really expensive. So I haven't done the maths, but it must be a ridiculous cash reserve. So they just have total freedom now to do whatever the hell they want.
But which one did you vote for of the two prototypes?
I voted for Scanner Sombre. I just really like the look of it. But yeah, Chris was saying that the Mark and Tom, also of Introversion, keep saying to him, like, why are you doing this cave game? This is the most un-introversion thing ever. And then, I played one more thing, which was Sluggy's Fruit Emporium, which is a game for the Vive by Timothy Johnson, where there were some gifts of this that I think got fairly widely seen, but I don't know if it's sort of widely known what the game is. You play a blue gelatinous tentacle blob with one giant eye and a grinning mouth. It's very cartoony. It's 3D, and it's for the Vive. And so the position of the headset determines where this big gelatinous blob is looking, and then your two controllers determine the position of its tentacles. And its tentacles can kind of like grasp things, and it's running a fruit shop. And so the first thing you do is reach over your fruit stocks and grab the metal shutters of your shop with both hands, and then flick them up to open the stall for the day. And then aliens come up to buy fruit, and there's no words in it. And so the way you figure out what they want from you is you just kind of pick up different fruits, and as you pick them up, their expression changes to indicate whether that's the fruit they want or the fruit they don't want. But their expressions are just hilarious. I think I burst out laughing every time I picked up a fruit that they didn't want. Like this look of like, what the fuck did you say about my mother? Like just absolute disgust and horror that you could possibly think they want the red fruit. And actually this was enhanced by the fact that when I first started playing the game, I didn't know how it worked. And so the first alien that came up to me was like a bright red, wide-headed thing. And I experimented for a while and found, oh, you like the purple fruit. And once I picked up the purple fruit, his expression turns into one of sheer, like, joy and excitement. Like, I'm going to get the purple fruit. And then you give it to them and they hold up some money, and you have to take the money with your Vive claw and manually open the cash register and stuff the bills in there. And the next one came along, and he was also a red alien with a wide head. And so I'm like, I want to give you the purple fruit because the last guy who looked like you did this, but is this racist?
That is profiling.
And so his look of disgust was all the more horrifying. Like, oh no, sorry, I didn't mean to assume anything. And because it's a Vive game, inevitably I started throwing fruit at the customers, and I don't think it does anything at the moment. I never successfully hit one and cause them any distress, which is my objective. But there's something about the immersion you get from VR mixed with the facial expressions of aliens in response to various fruits that's incredibly compelling. It's just like
it's such a specific thing to have discovered.
I know, but in any other game, no matter how good the art is, no matter how good the expressions were, if you just show me like a 2D alien kind of with an expression of disgust or delight, I just don't think it would have got a reaction from me. But in VR, you're just so there in the moment. You get all of the kind of, I think it triggers the social part of your brain in a way that,
it's like you've met them. It's not like you're looking at a picture. Yeah.
It's really interesting because I've read and heard a lot of people talking about a lot of the Vive prototypes and a lot of the Oculus Rift prototypes, and there don't seem to be a huge amount that couldn't be on a 2D screen.
Yeah.
And basically still be playable and fine. So it's kind of interesting to hear about a game where VR generally brings a new dimension to.
I found that was true for Job Simulator, which is out now.
Yeah.
It was a Vive launch game. Like, I loved that. And it is the kind of thing that, yes, you could play it with, some kind of like mouse controls where you're, picking up and manipulating. A bit like Surgeon Simulator would probably be the closest thing to it.
Yeah.
But actually, I think that genre of game, like, I think with VR, things a bit like Surgeon Simulator, where you're, doing slapstick actions in a world in first person, performing like a basic task from like a static position, will go from being like just Surgeon Simulator to being a genre. And the reason is that outside of VR, those games kind of have to be about slapstick. They kind of have to be about fucking it up and dropping stuff and cracking someone's ribs and accidentally dropping their ribs on the floor and then dropping a scalpel in their rib cage and all that stuff, trying to fish it out. Whereas in VR, there's still an element of slapstick, but because you're in control, like a decent amount of control, you can kind of participate in them both more genuinely and then mean it when you've deliberately fucked things up. Like and it allows you to play in a way that you just can't otherwise. Like genuinely is like, so in Job Simulator, I did the cooking one where you're asked to like make orders in a restaurant. And, one of the things is like, smashing eggs and then taking, cause it's all very simple. So you take an egg out of the fridge and you break it, and then it's got like basically a fried egg inside, right? It's not like you get like the liquid content, right? Like, and you have to get the fried egg out and then put the fried egg in the sandwich or something like that. But you can, the difference to me is like, if you were struggling with the controls at all, it would make sense to just do it in the easiest possible way. But when it is just like one big simple grab with one hand and then you have your other hand free, you can do things like, I was pulling them out of the fridge and then just like trying to lob them at the walls, the eggs, and then catch the fried egg with my other hand as they fell down. And it allows you to, and that, there's definitely, I know it's what they call it, the presence thing, but like there's definitely a cognitive gap between the two. Like as soon as you get that you can actually do things like, I'm going to try throwing fruit at the aliens,
Yeah.
That it makes a big difference. Like the other thing is like, opening the fridge to get an egg out and the egg rolling off the shelf and just intuitively catching it without having to like, wrangle a mouse keyboard control.
Yeah.
Like just actually just reaching out with my hand and
It's
going,
a one-to-one movement, right? That
it is. Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, it is. And I think that means that kind of thing can just be fun in of itself. Like things that would be so mundane they'd be tedious in other games become really fun when it's just you and some paddles.
The other thing that was really interesting about Sluggies that I didn't realize before about VR is that the amazing power of puppeteering. So this is a game that, like, unlike we were talking before about the Giant Bomb's Oculus stream, where they sort of got up and saw their body still in the driver's seat, and you've had that experience with Elite, Chris. Because this has your hands and your face, and because you're playing a giant blobby alien that has no legs, it basically has all the information it needs to fully animate this thing just based on your input. And you don't get this so much from playing. There is a CCTV thing, so you can watch yourself on the monitor, and it's fun to just wave your arms around and kind of be grinning at yourself. But actually, watching this alien go about its business, picking up fruits and sort of fussing with its store and kind of interacting with its possessions and opening and shutting the windows. Timothy's posted a bunch of GIFs of that from a third-person camera. And until I played it, I just thought these were like meticulously, perfectly hand-animated things, or like sort of manually puppeteered things where, you define an animation by carefully placing the model at each stage. And now I realize he's just playing the game. That's just what it looks like when you play the game. Like, you just make this perfectly expressive, extraordinary cartoon character. And I think if you try to make a realistic one, it'd be really hard because the intent behind your arm motions and your head motions doesn't tell you anything about what expression the person should be wearing. But when it's a giant grinning alien, like something about like him beaming away while he kind of like sorts out his fruits and puts some cash in the register and pulls the shutters up and down and just goes about his business. It's just incredibly endearing and like completely convincing. And I realized like basically we now all have motion capture systems, and most games are not going to do anything with that. It's because it's going to be first person. You never see yourself and it'll just be ignored. But anything where you can see yourself and it can fully animate a character in response to you, even if it doesn't follow like what your legs are doing or whatever, is going to be so powerful. And also that makes me think about like multiplayer stuff is going to be amazing. Like if there's just two Sluggies, just put two Sluggies in two different shops and just being able to see the other person doing their thing would just be great.
Yeah, Sluggy Online, where it's just all other people's shops forever. You can just wave at each other.
It's really tempting with VR because it's so new and like the appeals of everything is so hard to predict that like whatever you see is good, you just want that extended out to its logical conclusions. You're just like, oh yeah, it's all going to be about alien fruit stalls.
It's really exciting though.
That is really exciting. Yeah, because I've always been excited by the technology, but I've never been excited by the software yet. And hearing stories like that makes me...
Yeah, I think it's like,
quite excited.
It's a lot about detaching yourself from what you expect from a game in another context. Yeah. Like, because things that are fun in VR that wouldn't necessarily be fun in regular games, and vice versa. Like, I think that's probably the big leap everyone's going to have to make is like, what ideas got completely discarded as boring for regular games that would work amazingly.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny that this happened like just after the sort of walking simulator revolution, where like that became an acceptable genre sort of 4 years ago or something. And, now we're getting technology that I think will make it a lot more immersive and interesting. And
apart from the walking thing.
Yeah, ironically, not like walking.
This is like, we're getting into standing simulator.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is the logical progression. Like, yeah, a person in a booth doing a thing simulators. Like, VR Papers, Please should happen. That'd be amazing.
Perfect.
What's that film? Phone Booth. You're taking menacing calls from a man to kill all your family.
Yeah, and you see through the sniper scope that
the blobby alien.
Yeah,
grin on his face.
Bunch of fruit in the phone booth.
Yeah, exactly.
Pick up the purple fruit.
That's it. Future of VR then, sorted.
Yeah.
Well done, gentlemen.
What have you guys been playing?
Ooh. Been playing the Dark Souls.
We've got to link the flame, Tom.
Got to link the flame.
Is that at the Firelink Shrine?
Getting a load of lords into some chairs for some reason.
One
the actual
lord
plot of the game.
Is already in a chair. Will you find the other 4 lords, put them in the big chair to solve religion?
Yeah, so Dark Souls is still very reticent about, with the plot, and it gives you that overarching aim that you're supposed to, I guess, kill the lords, and then when you kill them, they'll go to their chairs. in Firelink Shrine. And then when they're all in their chairs after being killed, they will die again in some way to relink the fire and rebirth the world into a new age of light,
blah, blah, blah. It's like,
etc.
Yeah, it's like, I think if you're going to start a Dark Souls game anyway, I mean, it's hard to know to start with Dark Souls 3 because it's clear that obviously it's the big thing that's out this week and so on. It's definitely a Dark Souls game in that, as we've already established, it's about stuff. It's about fire and ash and undead and souls and big old castles and sad looking knights and people and bonfires. And all of this stuff is incredibly significant, but impossible to explain quickly. Like, and impossible to give any of the sense of its dignity or sense of import quickly.
It's very easy to make fun of because...
incredibly easy to make fun of.
Because, without the experiential whole of it, having experienced, you've been in those worlds and kind of unraveled them, over the course of hundreds of hours, it can't possibly hold any significance to you.
Yeah.
And I think what previous games have been very bad at, especially the first game, was giving you any reason to continue, giving you any kind of hook to latch onto and be drawn into it. Whereas I think Dark Souls 3 is better at that. It gives you a lot more characters to talk to, gives you a lot more people to recruit.
I agree to an extent, but it's still so far from being a game about meeting other people and finding out what their deal is.
Yeah.
It is a game about meeting a person who will be like half a skeleton wearing a shirt and then a bag on his head in the bottom of a dungeon, and he'll say, "Oh, would you like to help me? Here's a ring." I don't know what a ring actually is, though. And then he'll turn to ash.
Yeah. So that's all true. It's hard to get away from that. It's all the case. I like that little guy because, once he turns to ash, when they turn to ash, it means that they go back to your hub, the Firelink Shrine hub, which is where everyone you meet goes. It seems
the ashtray.
Like you're kind of you're this kind of you're this hero who's you're picking up stragglers throughout the world as you go along, and they kind of latch on to your heroism. And Dark Souls has always had an interesting relationship with what a hero is and stuff. So if you played previous games, you know that you might well be on a quest to destroy the world, as far as you know, really. You don't know what you're there for, apart from to kill bosses and to amass souls. And so there's an interesting kind of friction to that when you're recruiting people and they're coming back, and then you go back home and you see the little kind of thief man with his mask, and he's there. And
he's the one who doesn't understand rings.
He just talks with loads of bollocks at you for a while and stops.
And he's like, "Please, whatever it is, give it to Loretta." And it's like, "Oh, who's Loretta?" And then I don't want to spoil anything, but it's Dark Souls. Doesn't end well. And after that point, you can send him off to scavenge for stuff. And I don't know, all the NPCs. I love the little kind of gaggle of NPCs that you gather in Dark Souls 3 and in previous Dark Souls games as well.
Are you a different person in each of the Dark Souls games?
Yes. Yes, you are.
Yeah. I feel like we've come at one angle which explains Dark Souls, which is like, I mean, it's actually so, it's been interesting because this is coming after Bloodborne. I've only, like Tom, you've played a lot more Dark Souls 3 than me. I'm maybe 2 hours into it, and you start chipping away at today, and you're like 17 or something like that. So far, it hasn't really surprised me at all. Basically, until right before we started recording, when I beat a boss, and then there was some, big reveal the next area I got to go to.
That's right.
Bloodborne, despite being definitely part of that formula, was like full of new stuff to learn and stuff I hadn't seen before, and a whole aesthetic that was completely different. That kind of Victorian Lovecraftian kind of horror thing was totally different. The weapons, the walking cane that becomes a whip, that kind of stuff, and all the kind of, and the weirdness of it, which has made, even though it's a very similar game in a lot of ways, and Dark Souls 3 has been really interesting because in some ways it feels quite a lot like Bloodborne. Like the first main area in Dark Souls 3 looks quite a bit like Yharnam. Like it's still a castle, but it's like, what if you married the Undead Burg from Dark Souls 1 with Yharnam, you would get that. That's exactly what you get. Like
it's true. Yeah.
It's those two things. And like even down to, you level up by talking to a mysterious pallid woman.
That's all the way back to Demon Souls. That's a thing they only diverged from briefly
in Dark Souls 1. Yeah. But nonetheless, right, like, it's sort of, but in Bloodborne, even though it's a tradition, in Bloodborne, it's much, much weirder. Like, what she is really fucking strange and creepy.
That's a mystery that gets resolved as well, in a way that, so with Dark Souls 2, there was the Emerald Herald, I think she was called. Yeah. Again, she was where you leveled up. But the resolution of who she was just mad and stupid. Whereas with Bloodborne, I love Bloodborne. Bloodborne is one of my favourite games of the decade, of the last 10 years of playing games, I think.
Yeah.
And I see where you're coming from, actually. It's like you see moments of Bloodborne in there, you see moments of that kind of strangeness, but it's so familiar and it's so much a template of the games that have gone before.
Is it
even down to the attack patterns of enemies,
yeah,
which are the same as previous games.
So is it Miyazaki? Is that his name?
Yes.
And he did the Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls 3, but not Dark Souls 2, right?
Yes. But I think he pretty much co-developed Dark Souls 3 because he would have been working on on Bloodborne,
right,
for a portion of Dark Souls 3's development. And it's worth pointing out that the development of Dark Souls 2 underwent a lot of changes and kind of it was troubled basically. I'm not sure they knew what to do with it, or they had some ideas and they decided to change direction, which is probably responsible for the state of Dark Souls 2. Even though it's not an awful game, Dark Souls, it's not a bad game really at all. It's still really a really fun dungeon crawler. But it feels like Dark Souls 3 is actually, with the full production values behind it, with Miyazaki and with the best talent they have on that team, has kind of pushed that formula on a bit. If it had been released before Bloodborne, I think I would be enjoying it more.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. Like, I'm not hating it by any means, and it's hard to pass what exactly is me getting more familiar with it. Like, so, I mean, it makes sense for every new Souls game to start roughly at the same difficulty level as each other, because any one of them could be someone's first encounter with the series. But it's definitely weird. Like, in 2 hours, it's hard to gauge exactly equivalent progress, but in 2 hours of Dark Souls 3, I've done what probably took me the first 6 to 7 hours of Dark Souls 1. And it's not because the game is easier, it's just because, again, as you said, Tom, the attack patterns are pretty much exactly the same to the extent that fighting the first boss, and I decided to go in sort of to make it hard for myself by playing as a deprived character, where you start with no levels and nothing at all, and you just
almost literally naked. Yeah.
Naked with a stick and a shield, basically. Fighting the first boss, even though it's a beautiful arena, it's a really impressive thing you're fighting. It's like, oh, he's just stabbed twice. He's stabbed once, but quickly enough that he's probably going to do it again. And if he does it twice, he's definitely going to do a slower third one.
Yes.
Because that's always
the rule. Right?
Yeah, it's stab, big stab, or it's long sweep, half spin around, or it's jump slightly to the side and then sweep back the other way. And it's like, all of that stuff I've encountered before, to the extent that boss, even though it was quite hard, only took me a couple of goes, because it's like,
you internalized all that.
Kind of got it all now. Yeah. Like, I know how that works.
Timing, right.
The other thing is, and I don't know if you agree with this on this, Tom, because I might just be misremembering it. It feels like I've encountered more camera problems? Question mark?
I'm not sure, because the camera's always been a problem with those games. And I think if you play loads of Dark Souls, you learn to play the camera as well as playing the combat game. And because I played so fucking much now, like hundreds of hours between Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne, and now Dark Souls 3, I feel like I instinctively know when the camera's going to fuck up. And it has the boss backed into a corner. And so many Dark Souls bosses are about getting around to the ass and just stabbing the ass of the boss.
Big undefended ass.
That's right. Or just getting right in the crotch area and, really wrecking them. And if the boss is in a corner when that happens, the camera's going to fuck up. It's going to be a disaster. So you develop coping mechanisms, and this is stupid because it's a way of getting around just a massive flaw of the game. But you unlock so you can lock onto enemies, obviously. And so much of Dark Souls is about knowing when to lock on and when not to be locked on to someone. And if there's a guy has a charge move that's going to send him into a corner, you get rid of your lock on and you just do everything manually. You just go in, you control the camera completely yourself, you go to the corner behind him, and then you slash backwards towards the camera. Because if you lock on and the camera starts trying to do things, it's all you're gonna see is ass.
So you're gonna see the camera wants to be like behind you, pointing at the boss.
That's right.
Yeah. So if
you're
you're
in the corner,
then
so it really thrusts it into that bum. You're gonna see a lot of butt, and you're not gonna be able to understand where to slash or whether you're being hit or where to roll. So you just lock out, unlock.
This reminds me of Rocket League, where like the auto cam, like they recognized this problem obviously and just made like switching the camera mode be one of the primary buttons of the game.
Yeah.
And because they know that in certain situations the auto camera is great, and then in some situations the auto camera is going to fuck up. And
camera control in Dark Souls games is a skill, and it shouldn't be, but it is.
Yeah, and I think I've not played as much as you. I've played enough to sort of internalize that as well. I think to a degree. I found in this, and again, so the boss that I was doing when you popped around and ended up beating it, that was simply like, I think it's a boss with patterns I recognize, but it's like slightly bigger than the boss in Bloodborne. It's almost exactly the same as it, which is sort of a weird thing to think about, but it's a much bigger creature. But I feel like it's not, this is the thing, right? I feel like I can talk about encounters a little bit in Dark Souls 3 because I'm not spoiling anything, because literally anyone who cares about spoilers will have played Bloodborne and will have played Dark Souls 1 and will know exactly what I mean when I say, what if it's the big quadrupedal dog thing with a mace? Right? Because you fought that. You fought like the one that can kind of pounce but also swipe. And, the one I'm thinking about reminds me a lot of Bloodstarved Beast.
Yeah.
It's a very similar, the arena's very similar.
Yeah.
The difference is Bloodstarved Beast is a lot smaller. And so I've had fewer problems kind of like when I'm in him. Like, this is a creature that you can roll between its legs as it's doing attacks and stuff. And that's good. That's what you should be doing, is like rolling into it. So that you've got, make the most of that small window you have to do damage before you have to get out of the way of something else. But the problem is it's much bigger, so the camera problem becomes immediately more pronounced, which seems to be more of a question of scale than the kind of game design. The other reason where that comes up is there is a new type of enemy, or encounter that can happen. I don't want to spoil this, but essentially it means fighting a very, very, very big, visually confusing enemy with a very small hitbox. You encounter these very quickly. That's spoiling.
Tom is looking confused.
It's like you can. It's an enemy you can deal with if you kill it super fast. Otherwise, you have to deal with it in its problem form.
I can think of enemies further on than you are that do that.
I've encountered 2 of them so far in the distance.
Interesting.
Oh goddamn!
Anyway,
I'll explain to you in the.
Yeah.
It's shit. Trying to think of the best way to explain this without, because it's kind of important. Basically, you're fighting something which has like a man-sized damage zone inside a much bigger.
The man-sized damage zone.
No, I do understand. I understand now.
Inside a much bigger, more visually confusing thing.
Yes.
Okay. So, and that was one of the first instances where I was like, is this having worse problems at camera? Because the thing I'm aiming at is smaller than the
massive
thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are problems with that. Definitely.
So and so like, like if you're fighting one of them on a gabled roof and the camera is now trying to deal with both a slope and this thing and oh god, it's just a fucking mess. Like just. Not that the game is a fucking mess, but that kind of encounter is like, oh shit, I don't really know what to do.
It's interesting because like you see moments in Bloodborne where they try and fix it, where the camera pulls out a lot and gives you you become a much smaller character on the screen, and it tries to fix it. But like the first boss you can fight in Bloodborne is one of the worst camera bosses.
Yeah, because it's on it's a very big.
It's a narrow bridge.
It's a very big hairy thing on a very narrow thing.
And it seems the game seems to think that the walls of the arena are smaller than they need to be. If you're on a bridge and you're looking kind of across that bridge, it forces you in closer than it ever needs to. And it's this huge hairy thing that is just way too big for the arena, which is part of the stress of the fight. But the camera is abysmal. It's just really, really bad. You almost want to play it like an RTS from the top down. And it's
It seems like the ideal situation for camera, because on a bridge, like the place where the player can go is smaller than the actual physical space, so you can move the camera way outside of where the player can go.
Yeah, but at the same time in Bloodborne, there's so much kind of environmental detail and kind of like I don't know, hearses and
Fucking hearses, a big pile of candles,
a big old coffin or something, stuff that the camera just really clips in on. And you can see how the logic is interacting with the world, in the way that they intended. But in this particular environment with this boss of this size in this arena, that is a bad thing. Like
actually, yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think when I'm thinking of the boss I just beat, it's actually just like not quite as bad cleric beast.
Yes.
Like,
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
I had the same problems with that guy. I think in terms of the repetitive attack patterns and the kind of stuff they've basically repeated from previous games, that does continue for a bit, but the bosses do get more inventive. So there are a couple of major bosses in the next area, and one of them is genuinely different from any other fight I think I've had in Dark Souls. I hope that continues, and I've heard that the bosses later on are pretty extraordinary.
Cool. Oh yeah, I mean, it looks amazing, and the combat system is still great. Yeah. It's just sort of, it's such a strange thing to have a game that had that much magic to it and felt so different to everything else just become something I can just power through.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of got it. Like, you know, I remember playing Dark Souls 1 for the first time and being so worried about losing my souls, and now I just, like, anything less than like 3,000.
It's fine, isn't it?
It's like just expedition tax. Yeah. Like, if I lose it, fine. You know, that kind of, you get into that rhythm of how you crack these things open, and like,
I think what saves it for me is the level design, particularly in the area, like, you're about to go into a huge area because I just saw you see it, and that area is so full of NPCs and secrets and really cool little kind of characters that you can find in its nooks and crannies. And it's, for me, like, what I love about Souls games is unraveling those areas, and it's about going into a new place and knowing that there are secrets here that it will take me hours and hours to discover. Like, it takes me ages to get through a Souls game because I want to go into every corner and I want to find everything. And there are so few games that incentivize me to do that. And, you know, if it's not just like a new weapon. Like, if I see a statue of a god from Dark Souls 1 that to me is like, holy shit. So she's a factor now. That's a part of the lore now, and that's, you know, that's going to influence the way I think about the rest of the plot. And a few games have that power. And I still think there's a lot to draw out of Dark Souls 3 that I've not yet encountered. And also, I think there's huge value from refining that formula. And in Dark Souls 1, it wasn't refined. Like, the Bed of Chaos area, like, I went back earlier this year and played it. It's straight up shitty. Like, they spam like 15 Taurus demons into a corner. Then you get further into it, and all of the enemies in that area are literally turds that breathe fire and move at 2 miles an hour and are just not a threat. And like, that area is just, it's rubbish. It's just a very bad area in that game. And, you know, all you read about is how amazing Dark Souls is, but it's got these areas and these bosses that are bad. And that's all been relatively fixed.
That's true.
Across the course of how the games have evolved. And their level design has gotten way better. And their boss design has gotten way better as well. And there are lots of ways where that formula is almost refined to the sharpest edge it can be. I'm not sure I want to play another Dark Souls game after this. I think this is the last Dark Souls game for me. I think this is the one where they will have reached their aims, and they will have reached the end of their journey with this format. Yeah. I look forward to what they do next, but this is it for me. I
feel the same way, and I felt the same way with Bloodborne. That's the thing. I think that's the thing, is like, I think it's good, by all means. It's just that it's things that are good about it were also good about Bloodborne.
Sure.
Like, I mean, and there's points of similarity. Like, they're very similar dogs.
Yeah, they really do. Oh, look out for the pitchfork villagers, and there are identical attack patterns to the pitchfork villagers in Bloodborne.
That town wasn't finished. It just moved.
Yes, moved to this other game.
Yeah, like, but also like set pieces, like bits of design which are really nice, like a huge staircase leading up to a church or a big cathedral. And the huge staircase is patrolled by kind of austere enemies that march up and down that you can actually get past or move around or kind of stealth past if you prefer, is a set piece I've now encountered in Dark Souls 3 that is exactly the same in Bloodborne.
Yeah, yeah.
And the difference in Bloodborne is that you're kind of doing the whole thing under a kind of, as a kind of weird missionary in a hat who kills things with a whip, which, I don't know, like,
The thing is that, like, we haven't had a chance to really talk about Bloodborne in this podcast because we focus on PC games, but...
There are still calls for you to do a Bloodborne podcast.
We should do, I'd love to do a dedicated Bloodborne podcast because it is fucking amazing. Like, it's so good. The DLC, unbelievable.
I haven't gone around to play it yet.
Yeah.
In fact, I actually did hit, this probably be the time to confess I've never finished a Souls game. Like, I always get quite deep into them and just sort of peter out. Like, not, just, I don't know why. Like, that's something to, like, I have, on my Xbox 360, I have a Dark Souls save very deep into the game that I've never seen through.
Yeah.
I've never actually didn't play Dark Souls 2, so that's the difference. And then I got a Bloodborne save at least a decent length of the way into that game. Again, that I haven't gone back to and finished. So maybe there's something, maybe it's me more than the series, but yeah, Bloodborne captured for me more of that sense of like why people get so excited about this thing, these things, why they feel so new and special than Souls 3 has so far. Even though I really like Souls 3 and there's so many things I really like about it. Like I like the animation, I like the feel of it. I like recognizing things from the first game and that sense of familiarity. There's something about the medieval weaponry that it has its own qualities compared to Bloodborne's kind of like weird trick weaponry stuff. Yeah. All that stuff is great. And imagine we make fun of it. I like the tone of the world and the storytelling and the sensory in this part is something more important. But it's like, yeah, it's just extremely familiar now, which is a weird thing to think about a game that is sort of defined on what the fuck was that, right?
The good news is that I found it becomes less familiar the more you dig into it.
Okay.
So it goes through like a undead burg area, then it goes through the area you're about to go into. Then after that, it becomes increasingly weird. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. Because I've not even fought the first Lord. Those, those chairs that you're supposed to kill the Lords and they go in the chair. Not even got to the first one yet. So it's really early days to see what the vision of the game it really is.
Dark Souls traditionally holds off its Lords though.
Really, yeah, it does. It also holds off its twists as well. It also holds off its truly weird shit until later. So I'm really excited to find out what they've done with this budget and with the production values that they have.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's a level of polish there that wasn't evident in the first two games. And that's really exciting as well. To see them, a game that feels more finished than Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2.
You just mentioned that Dark Souls 3 has had possibly one of the worst ad campaigns I've ever seen.
Yeah, the marketing is fucking odd around this game.
It's fucking weird. Because we can have this conversation for half an hour about this weird, whether the game retains the unique mythos that it's built up around itself, or whether familiarity could damage that, and so on. But meanwhile, utterly damaging that mythos is the Dark Souls Hot Wings Celebrity Challenge.
What?
Yeah, they've done some
weird shit. Yeah.
Some really weird shit around it.
I saw that there was Slashy Souls, like a mobile endless runner that ties into the Dark Souls series.
Yeah, they've launched a comic, they've got shit t-shirts, they're turning it into like a big fucking banner event, and man, I don't know, like, it's a publisher trying to make a buck, and fair enough. But I'm just happy none of that has penetrated into the game itself. Like, I don't care about the marketing around the thing. Yeah. The thing itself, as long as the thing itself stays, intact, and that actually From made it. And
the DLC maiden in Firelink Shrine.
Imagine. It could be so much worse. All this stuff's on the periphery of the game. And they haven't, From haven't had anything foisted on them. This is clearly their creation.
It's just such a weird thing.
It's just weird the way it's been
just
presented.
so fucking weird. It is like saying the fucking, I don't know, the Bayou Tapestry Hot Wings Challenge. Like, it's not, it's not like how you would get someone to interact with the thing. And there's going to be a lot of people sort of tricked into buying this game.
Who might.
I like Hot Wings. I'm in.
Fucking
Lords on chairs.
How about
What?
some lords?
Hot Lords.
Lords, got some lords.
Hot Lord Ash.
I think this is going to be an evolving conversation about Dark Souls 3. Because I think as we go through it, it's going to
I'm going to keep plugging away at it.
So you can look forward to that, Tom. As you just.
I always, like, anytime you guys are talking about something for a long time, I continually reevaluate. Should I be playing this? And usually I've arrived at the answer no ahead of time, and then I continue to think, but should I play it? Isn't there some reason I should play it? And I think, no. Because, like, the two things I like least are
repeating areas and bosses.
Oh no! God damn! Stay away from this game.
Yeah, this is a game about repeating areas on the way to a boss, so that you then repeat. So, yeah, no.
I've talked to Andy Kelly at the PC Gamer office, and I've got a lot of sympathy with people who want an easy mode, who just want to see the world and read the lore and be a part of it. But the trouble is with Dark Souls is that combat is such a the entire friction of the world is combat, and without that there's nothing. You just breeze through it.
We have a question about this actually, so we can
let's
come back to
this.
I just remembered I did play something else, which was Return of the Obra Dinn. It's not at Res, just so this is the follow-up game to Papers. Well, not follow-up. It's the next game from the guy who did Papers, Please, Lucas Pope, and it is a first-person game rendered in 2 colors. So
But it's 3D.
It's rendered, yeah. So it's rendered as if it's on a like Macintosh 1 or whatever. Like I can't remember what version it
was.
Like
a 286 or something.
Yeah, where they literally only had 2 colors. And back then, I played games on whatever that version of the Mac was, or it might have just been the Apple II or something. I played like Shuffle Pack Cafe and stuff, and the art style of that is just everything has to be done with dithering because you literally only have 2 colors. So he's done that, and he's made his own like rendering system for a first-person game that does everything with dithering and stuff like that. And you're exploring an old ship. A long time ago, he released like the first version of it. I think it was literally a year ago. And then for GDC, he's made a section of the game that basically covers the same bit. It's still just the start of the game, but he's fleshed it out much, much more, and it looks way nicer, and you get a much better sense of what it is. And in particular, there's a book. I actually played the whole thing, the whole demo through without picking up the book it tells you to pick up, and then complained to Alex, who's been on the podcast before, about like, yeah, but you don't really do anything in this game. And I said, did you find the book? Oh no, I forgot to pick up the book. And the book is you're boarding a ship that has gone missing, and it doesn't really flesh in how you found it. Like, the backstory is the ship just went missing, and now you are going aboard it. I guess it's maybe returned, since it's called Return of the Obra Dinn. And you are, in some sense, investigating it, and you have with you a mysterious box, which you open at the start, and it contains a kind of thing that looks like a compass with a skull on it, and that allows you to walk up to the corpses that you find on the Obra Dinn and see how they died. But in keeping with its incredibly lo-fi approach, the way you see the past is you kind of use your death compass on a corpse, and it'll fade to black, and then you'll hear, or whatever the second color is, you will hear a kind of like radio play, basically. You'll kind of hear what happened just before they died, and then you don't see any of it until that radio play finishes, and then you see one instant of time, and time is paused, so it'll be like, someone shooting someone else in the face with a gun, and all the blood is spraying through the air, and it's just hanging there in the air, and in the background you can see various people kind of shouting and diving and all kinds of stuff, but none of it moves, and you just walk around that for a while, and then you're pulled back to the present. And it's, as far as I can tell, it's never interactive. In the past, you can't do anything at all. All you can do is look around. And there's nothing to read as far as I've seen. No one speaks. There's no sound. There's just music going on. And so it's incredibly focused, I guess you could say. It's like a very narrow slice of information. And the cool thing about the new demo that kind of made me finally get it was this book, which is the crew roster. And it's just a list of all the names, and there's hundreds of them. Well, probably about 100. And it's their name, it's their nationality, it's their role on the boat. Some of them are just passengers, some of them have particular crew roles. And then there's a column for fate. If you are ever making a crew roster for your journey out into the sea, don't put a fate column on there, because it seems to doom you. And obviously all you're finding is corpses, so everyone whose fate I know died. But the fate column is interactive. You click on it, and then you are taken to a kind of sort of series of, it's like filling out a form, but with different options for each kind of bit. So you say, your first choice is you have to say whether they're whether they're dead, alive, or unknown, and defaults to unknown. So if it's a corpse, then you find dead. Then it says were they killed, was it suicide or something else, maybe. And then if you say killed, it says, okay, who killed them? And you've got to specify who killed them by choosing someone else. So you choose, was it a enemy? Was it a crewmate? Was it a beast? Or was it the devil?
What?
So far, I've never had to choose the devil. But
Is this a way of figuring out the murders, or is this a kind
yeah.
of, okay.
So, this is your input method for your answers. Right. So the rest of the game is figuring out how they died, and then the logbook is how you say, okay, I think I know how this guy died now. Okay. And figuring out how people died is pretty easy because every corpse you interact with just shows you how they died. Like, it's just a guy getting shot in the face. That guy died by getting shot in the face. But the tricky part is, who is the fuck is that guy? He's got a beard. That's all you know. Nothing happens in these moments. They're just completely frozen. So all you have to go on, like the first one I figured out was, in the little radio play you hear before, there's two men trying to get into the captain's cabin. So you know the guy inside is the captain. You hear him telling him he's going to kill them, and then you see him killing them, or killing one of them. But the question is which one did he kill? And you can hear one of them yelling at the other one to break down the door. And the other one who replies has a Scottish accent. And in the crew roster, the first mate, the second mate, the third mate, only one of them is Scottish. So I just took a guess that probably the Scottish guy is the one. If he's being yelled at to break down the door, he must be the one with the axe. And the one with the axe is the one being shot. Therefore, whoever it says is Scottish was killed by the captain with a gun. And, once you say who killed them, you have to say what murder weapon they used. So it's a weird kind of
advanced Cluedo.
Yeah, exactly. And it's cool. The thing I would quite like is, the problem is, you can leave blanks. You can say, I think he was killed, but I don't know who by or whatever. But that's never the issue. It's always, I know exactly who he was killed by. I know what weapon was used, but I don't know who it is. And there's no way to put that information in. All you can do is you have to pick someone before you say what their fate is. Yeah. And I kind of want to note that stuff down. I want to say a person with a beard and a Scottish accent was killed by this. And then later on figure out, how...
So you want an in-game notebook of some sort to type down?
Yeah, I guess it's just a kind of her story thing where you take your own notes.
But I love games where, Baldur's Gate, you had your own journal in that game where if you press the journal, you could actually type in your own...
Right.
You could just type in and make your own crazy fancy.
Yeah, I remember Ultima Underworld and System Shock 2 as well. On the map, you can just click to write a note. Mm-hmm. So you can just say, there was cool loot here. Or...
Good one for that is Viscera Cleanup Detail.
Really?
It's the game about cleaning levels. Have you guys played Viscera?
I've never played it, but I know what it is.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
So, I played a bunch of it recently because it's an amazing co-op game, but Viscera Cleanup Detail is... You are space janitors, basically, sent into what would be like a level from Doom or something like that after the fascist space marines have been through. All the scientists have been killed, but all of the kind of escaped lab specimens have also been shot to bits. And then you've got to clean the place. Basically, top to bottom. You've got to weld over bullet holes in walls and things. And it's one of the interesting things about it is it's not a puzzle game. It's not there's here are the hard criteria for success. In fact, the whole thing is super analog. It's clean when it kind of looks clean, but the amount of stuff that can go wrong is kind of spectacular. But also on top of that, it has this report filing system, which is actually optional. You can do well in the missions just by cleaning them up, and that's the thing. But the way you should play it, and people should play it because it is great, but get a friend or a couple of friends, and then prepare to give an evening to a single map. Because it can literally take 4 hours to clean. Wow. It takes a long fucking time. And maybe add 50% more time if you want to fill the report in properly. And it's actually sort of a similar thing in a weird way. It makes an interesting comparison with Obra Dinn, because it actually has one similar mechanic, which is, so you'll find bodies around the levels and they'll be in various states. They'll be rendered in half or shot or whatever. And each of them will have this little ID chip next to them, which is looks like a USB pen, but you can take that and plug it into your janitor's computer. And then when you go, that's the only other thing you use the computer for is to say, I'm done with this level. And then when you say, I'm done with this level, it says, would you like to fill in the report? And it is incredibly fucking long. It is potentially 20 minutes of doing paperwork at least. And in order to do it right, you need to have been taking really thorough notes, because for every person whose ID you found, which if you've done a decent job of cleaning the level, should be all of them, you can say, who were they and how did they die? But that, and so that's thing one, and that takes a lot of environmental storytelling, partly also because it isn't, unlike Obra Dinn, I guess, it's not static. Every single thing in the world is a physics object, and everything can be contaminated. So if you are if you're staring at a corpse, trying to figure out what exactly the circumstances in which they died, what killed them, one of your mates could just come along and pick up the top half of the corpse and walk off with it. To put it in the incinerator and ruin your kind of attempt at doing the paperwork.
Yeah.
But also, someone might be walking past with a bucket of bloody water from where they've been mopping and just fucking bump into you with it, and then it goes everywhere, and now you can't tell anything anymore because you can't tell.
Oh my god, this is amazing. All I saw about this game is that I thought it was the slapstick 5-minute thing where...
No, it's a slapstick 5-hour thing.
That's so good.
Honestly, I suppose I haven't talked about it on the podcast before, because, but the paperwork thing, we've never actually done it fully, thoroughly, but then it gets into kind of crazy territory. It asks you to fill in some things like, what did you make of your, colleagues' performances? How did they do? Were they helpful? How did they do? How did you rate the overall thing? What kind of happened generally, on the mission? But if any of you die, you also count towards the death toll. You have to fill in your own death. And that, dying is not a good thing because you create a lot more mess.
How can you die in this?
Loads of ways. So I'll give you the example would be, I'm exploring the level because you go in and you don't really know what, you go in level blind. You don't really have any sense of what you find data pads and stuff from scientists with what might happen and that kind of thing, but you don't know anything. And me and my friend Dan went into a room that had dead scientists everywhere. There were bombs, TNT on loads of shelves throughout this room. And then in the corner of the room, there's just this Sarlacc pit, this maw, this alien maw that's kind of come out of the ground and is still there. And then we're sort of looking at it and we try putting something in it and that it eats it. So that's fine. But then we put something else in it and it just vomits everything back up. And then I don't know how, but one of the things it spits out, clings off a wall, hits one of the sticks of dynamite, which starts glowing. And me and Dan just have a chance to look at each other and go oh fuck, as the entire room just explodes. All the other dynamite set each other up. And that ruins everything, because that means every physics object in that room, all of the bodies, all of the ID tags, none of it is where it was originally was now. It's all fucked.
You go back and clean up your own deaths.
Yeah. You actually play as a new janitor, and then the previous, you have to then fill in the death report. You have to then fill in the death report from the previous janitor. So when we got to the end of the thing, we'd been when we find 4 hours later, we finished that mission, and there'd been 18 deaths among us. And we had to do in order, 1 and 2 were definitely explosions because we died together. The second one was Dan pushing me into the Sarlacc for fun. So that was 3. And then there was an amazing one where I kept finding these fucking bombs everywhere, and Pip and Dan had no idea why it was me that just kept finding them, the TNT. And then I was I thought, I kept finding it, so I thought I'd play a trick on Dan. So you can get dustbins from the dustbin dispenser, and you have to to make it easy to carry things around. You can put loads of stuff in a bin, then pick up the bin and put the bin in the incinerator. So I took an empty bin, put dynamite in at the bottom of it, then filled the rest of it with rubbish. And went up to the incinerator and said, "Oh, Dan, I'm just going to put something in the incinerator. Make sure you close the door of the incinerator after I've put it in." And so I just I pop it into the incinerator and he closes the door and I'm hee. But he was sitting off to the side. And for some reason, closing the door in the incinerator, rather than blocking the force of the explosion inside the incinerator, just directed the force in a really narrow beam that only hit me, but didn't hit Dan. So Dan's what? And we hear this hiss from inside the thing, which is the bomb starting to ignite. And then there's this explosion, and rather than die, I just turn to giblets and explode outwards like a human shotgun, all over
the most mess.
Yeah, there's the most mess you could possibly make.
The most mess.
But later we're trying to figure out, was that death 6 or 7? The other one was I found a bomb, but found that if you were holding the bomb and you held down the mouse button while you were holding it, your character started fucking with it and pressed the button on it, and then it activates. And I just ran into the middle of everyone I'm so sorry, and it exploded.
Wow, damn.
Because the huge mess took Pip out with me. Like, it's so good.
Holy shit, this is amazing.
Yeah.
We should fucking cover this more.
Yeah, I
I've
know.
already written about it. That's crazy.
How many players can you have?
I've played it with 5. I think it's quite a lot.
We should do a diary on this.
Yeah,
That's
no, we should.
awesome.
It is like, I can't play it more than like once a week or something, because it is tidying.
It's a lot of work.
It fucking is, like, loads of, like, it's
I love that they must have thought, like, okay, so we made a game about the unfun part where you have to clean up after everyone. What's the other unfun part? Paperwork.
But it is, like, the meticulous detail. Like, you'd need someone, I think, full-time just taking notes, who would go into the scene first, make notes of everything, and then let you clean up. Like, that would be the only way of doing it properly. But, like, there's stuff like, if you walk through blood or ichor or whatever, you leave footprints, which you then need to mop up. So getting buckets of clean water from the clean water dispenser to clean your mop to get the bucket thing is really, you have to be super meticulous about it. Like, it is, on one hand, incredibly tedious, but also that's part of the point. Like, part of it is like realizing that, you know, oh shit, there's bloodstains on the ceiling. So you have to go and get the portable, like, extractable lift thing. One of you stands on the lift, the other one operates it. But periodically, all of the equipment periodically breaks. So sometimes when you go to the clean water, you go to the clean water dispenser, rather than giving you a bucket of clean water, it'll just give you a bloody leg that will, like, bounce out of the clean water dispenser and then just, like, bounce along the floor and cause a huge mess. Or whatever. And then sometimes the spring lift thing that you can, like a window cleaner's lift that you can use to kind of move people up so they can clean the ceiling, will fucking just rocket them into the ceiling really fast, then there's a much bigger blood stain on the ceiling. Fantastic. It's so good.
Is this game finished?
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's been out for like years. Like, but anyway, just talking about dynamic paperwork in video games.
Yeah.
Like in that same mission, I found an alien artifact that they kept telling me to put down, but I couldn't put it down once I picked it up because it was compelling me to try and throw myself into the nearest Sarlacc pit. And so it would keep trying to take over my controls. And like, yeah, it's very, very extremely good. But yeah, not related to Obra Dinn, but I think
Pretty
it may be similar. Yeah. Essentially, murder mystery games are even harder if you're playing with your friends and it's all physics.
And you can be murdered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shall we do questions?
From questions,
That's
I
where they
think
come
we
from.
shall.
How dare you even? Yes.
Brief moment of drama here.
As we figure it out. No. So yes, we will. The first question comes from Zed on Twitter, who writes, "What does the panel think about games being too hard? Should all games have a range of difficulty options or not?" He used Dark Souls 3 and Hyper Light Drifter as his examples in his tweet. I thought I'd read this one first because it relates to our conversation about Dark Souls specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if Dark Souls 3 had an easy mode, or as, you know, they proposed and perhaps implemented for Mass Effect, just a kind of a story
narrative mode,
a narrative
yeah.
mode, would that be a good idea for Dark Souls?
Well, so it depends, like, before the familiarity set in, right? Okay, so put it a different way. So one of the reasons people lose their shit about Dark Souls 1 as a kind of greatest of all time type work is because it's not just that it tells its story through its mechanics, because it doesn't really, right? Like, the story isn't a man hit a man at the right time to stab him in the bum.
It kind of does with its resource mechanics.
But it does with its resource mechanics.
Yeah.
And it does with the notion of, like, struggle and repetition and death and rebirth and that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure.
So they are linked. And so, so in a sense, you take away the struggle and you take away something of the nature of the story that's being told, right?
Yeah.
Like, Dark Souls 1 is video games is Pilgrim's Progress. And you can't really tell the point, like, Pilgrim's Progress as a concept. I mean, there were literally pilgrims in Dark Souls 3, so, you know, kind of does link quite naturally. Would be ruined if the pilgrim in question had a car. Like, you know what I mean? It takes something away from not just the pacing or the journey, but the meaning of the journey as well. But them big castles and trees are real nice, and maybe it'd be nice to just go and see them without having to beat up a twat.
Yeah.
Having to turn Lord to ash.
The game is the combat. Like, the combat is everything in Dark Souls. Like, without that, you're just walking around a place looking at trees. And
so as an outsider to Dark Souls, I don't want to play it at all for the combat or the bosses. From everything I hear, even the positive stuff just tells me, oh, this is totally not your kind of thing. But the reason I keep asking myself, maybe I should play it, is I keep hearing such great things about the way it tells its story and how it's kind of obtusely it tells its story and how it's just all in there, but it doesn't shove any of it in your face. And there aren't so many games I can go to kind of study that stuff and to find out what that means. And so I would, if I could, I would play an easy mode of Dark Souls just to sort of see, how that stuff is presented. And like during a boss battle, I still want to encounter the fights. If I could just play them the normal way, and then when I die, sort of decide, okay, let's just say I won and move on. I would like to just see what the next bit of the scenery is and what the next bit of story is.
Yeah, the trouble is with that, with Dark Souls specifically, is that a lot of the story is told through item descriptions. And a lot of the way you get items...
I can read those.
Yeah, but a lot of the way you actually gain items is by killing enemies over and over again until they drop them. So through the kind of repetitive kind of gradual conquering of an area, enemies that you fight over and over again will drop different parts of their armor and their gear and their weapons. Yeah. And then by the time you reach the boss and have conquered it, you can go back and look at those descriptions, and they will have revealed a lot about who those people were and what they were doing there and the story.
Could they increase those drop rates for easy mode?
Well, I think that it's like, where do you draw the line? If you don't want combat to be a factor, if you want just everyone to die in one slash, then the boss should just drop all the gear. Or drop all the lore in some way. Just the
first person I kill should drop all the lore.
The grand boss lore drop. But there comes a point where I think you've kind of dismantled the game to such an extent that would become meaningless, in the sense that earning that stuff in a way is part of the pleasure of the game.
Yeah, I can already tell, like, even on the most basic level, that this is veering so far from what the developers want that they would never ever do it. Like, I know they would never do it.
You're reaching a stage where you might as well just read a wiki. You know what I mean? And maybe, watch a YouTube video of someone walking through an area where they've already killed everyone.
Yeah.
And at that point...
I could do that. I did that for Uncharted. Not because it was difficult, but because I didn't have the console.
But should a developer... At that point, it feels like sabotage. It feels like they're sabotaging their own experience, their own intended experience. And should a developer code that into the game? I'm not sure. Yeah.
This question interested me because Hyperlight Drifter came out recently, and it's a really beautiful game, but it's famously difficult. And I played it for a while, and I got to... It does... I happen to know this is a pattern it employs often. You encounter a new enemy type that's kind of bigger and nastier than what you've encountered before, and you fight it on its own. And I died like 3 or 4 times to this big slug thing, and then I defeated it, and that was cool. And then immediately afterwards, there's 3 slug things and like 5 other normal enemies as well.
This is a classic.
And the normal pattern. And then I die to that, and then when you die to that, you reset to before the initial slug thing.
Right.
And for me, I have a very low tolerance for difficulty anyway. I'm just not interested in skill-based challenges. I'm much more interested in like strategy and planning and thought and sort of, planning your way around stuff. And Spelunky is one of my favorite games. That's quite skill-based. And I'm okay with it as long as when I fail, I'm not asked to repeat what I just did. And in particular, I can't stand to repeat anything I did right. Like, when I killed that first slug, I did it right. I killed the first slug, I did it well. And then the 3 slugs and the 5 enemies, I failed on that. And I need practice on that. I don't need to practice the first slug. I know how to kill the slug. I just need to know,
yeah, you should never play Dark Souls.
You really should never play Dark Souls.
So the question is, should Hyperlight Drifter have an easy mode? And I guess I don't know, really, because I don't know what their priorities are in terms of narrative versus combat. I think it's great that Mass Effect 3 had a narrative mode. Sure. And I didn't need to use it myself because I happen to really like Mass Effect 3's combat. But if I didn't, it wouldn't be the gene that might make me not like Mass Effect 3's combat would have nothing to do with the gene that makes me enjoy Mass Effect 3's story. They're just divorced.
At the same time, though, like there's an element of challenge to Mass Effect story, like not in that it's hard mechanically, but as in it confronts you with things you've got to interpret and make decisions about. Yeah. Whereas Dark Souls doesn't. Dark Souls is about just the slow accretion of detail as you, and like literally, it would be genuinely. I think it'd be bad storytelling if it was too fast.
Yeah.
Because you just like if you read it on a wiki, you don't really get it, because as Tom was saying earlier, it's about unpicking this world and noticing details. Like, I don't know, but like I find it hard to force myself to notice all the details in an environment, right? Like I'm more likely to notice things on my second time through. Like I'm a completely habitual film rewatcher for that reason, like because I like the experience of like going back over something until I've picked out stuff about it I wouldn't necessarily have picked out the first time I saw it. And that is sort of what Dark Souls forces you to do. Its difficulty is there to force you to kind of go back through areas.
That's right.
And maybe this time you see something slightly differently. You notice a pattern of enemies slightly differently. You get a different item which has a different lore description. But on that given run, you're only having to pay attention to that one item. You're not getting a shower of them. And that's one particular run through an area out of 8 or 12 or however many. And so you have to be okay with that level of repetition, and you have to be okay with that level of repetition being forced essentially by the need to not only so you'll die to a boss because you have to learn all of its attacks. And if you die to all of its attacks, well, I mean, it's never quite that neat, but like, if a boss has 9 different ways of attacking you and it's going to take you at least 9 attempts to learn all of them, then you're going to do the area that precedes the boss 9 times. And the whole point is that you are slowly kind of basically like baking in the story into your own mind without really realizing that's what's happening.
I think,
and it wouldn't work if you just did it in fast motion, because it's not a cutscene where someone says, we've got to save the Krogans or whatever, right? It's like, it's a one piece of lore text that suggests that perhaps this god has perhaps done this thing. Perhaps.
I think Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne endure that level of repetition far better than the previous games did.
Yes.
I think that's one of their great successes, in that they give you more avenues of exploration and more just kind of parallel areas and little side quests and little side things to discover than the previous games did. So that repetition yields new bosses and new enemies and new places to explore constantly, even as you repeat. Whereas in Dark Souls 1, you repeat and repeat, but there isn't necessarily that depth there that, opens up new doorways,
it's like
new areas.
The reason a difficulty setting would be so anathema to what Dark Souls is, I think, would be because it's partly a game about lowering the difficulty for yourself. Like, an area is never harder than the first time you're in it, really. Definitely. And then it gets easier, like either in a big literal way, like you open up a shortcut that allows you to get from the spawn back to the boss faster or something like that, but also in the order in which you might encounter an enemy. Like, it's like, I think it was James Davenport in the PC Gamer review who pointed out the sort of Edge of Tomorrow Groundhog Day thing with Dark Souls. Like, you do those same runs enough times, you learn not just, I have to, how to beat this enemy, but like the crazy exact timings of it. Like, you run down off the watchtower, you jump onto a lower ledge, you run down a staircase, and then if you jump off and do a drop attack at exactly that moment, you're going to land on the giant axeman that's walking past, because he will always be walking past at exactly that moment. And so what the kind of trepidatious exploration the first time you play,
becomes
where
mastery.
where you go down the stairs, oh no, there's an axeman here, and then you have to have a long drawn out fight with the guy, becomes mastery, where that same guy that was a big scare the first time you encountered him, you've just totally beaten him by having your kind of like death time travel machine, where you are now like so far ahead of him that you're just sort of literally rolling over him on the way to the lift that you've now unlocked that'll take you down to the next area and so on. And like what is initially an ambush is like, okay, there's 3 guys about to jump over that wall, and you're hitting them before they're even there. Like, that's the point of the game, is that feeling of like, it's easy now, right? Like, it was hard, now it's easy. But it doesn't come from making it easy first time.
Yeah, and it's I don't know, turning that game, an easy mode would turn that game into a slideshow of locations, and if you were to progress through it, you would never absorb the story of it, because it's supposed to be this grueling uncovering of a narrative. But that's Dark Souls specifically. Like, obviously, we talked about Mass Effect, and obviously easy modes can work really, really well, depending on the game.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't believe Dark Souls 3 provides an easy mode. I think it just sets the difficulty and that's it, and you're locked into it.
Yeah.
Most games do.
An interesting kind of game for this question is Spelunky, because, like I say, it's one of the few games that's considered hard that I really like, and I don't really think of it as hard because I wasn't... Like, for me, a difficult game is when I try it and I fail at it and then I'm forced to repeat what I did. And that I get pissed off and I stop playing it, so I don't play hard games. And I did play Spelunky because when I tried and failed, I got to play a new level. And so for me, you can say that, yes, I did level 1-1 19 times, but for me, it was like I just played 19 new levels. Every time it was different, therefore I was progressing. I wasn't progressing towards the end of the game, but I was encountering new stuff. And so that was interesting to me, and so I was happy to play that endlessly, and it didn't feel punishing, it didn't feel difficult. It was just, I was dying, but I was then experiencing something new. But I have heard from other people who, were bounced off Spelunky because it was so hard, and the same for Invisible Ink, which is another randomized game where, technically restarting is not a huge problem because it's, a fresh level and a fresh, situation. But I know Derek, he was dead against an easy mode, and he even talks about, this in the book Spelunky by Boss Fight Books, by him, where he had one particular person who kept giving me feedback on an early version of Spelunky, or the PC version, saying this is too hard, this part is too difficult, you need to have an easy mode or something like that. And he resisted putting it in an easy mode, and eventually that person kept on emailing him and kept on playing the game, kept on getting further and further, and then complaining about the next bit he got to. And Derek kind of took that as evidence that he was right not to add an easy mode because this person did eventually get to the bits that he was talking about. But I also think there's just loads of people who just bounced off it completely. You probably didn't hear as much from those people because they don't bother to email the creator of the game. You just play it and you just get killed immediately and you're like, fuck this game. And I don't think Spelunky would lose anything from having a mode where you just play the mines in some kind of mode where it's half as many enemies and half as many hazards, and you just get used to the controls and you get used to how far your jump takes you and how to deal with bats and how to deal with spiders. And it doesn't really, I don't think it would really take much away from the game, cause that's what it's like for me. I still play the game occasionally, and, when I play it, the fact that I know how to deal with bats, mines become easy. Once mines become easy, it becomes a much more interesting game, because then you get to the jungle, and the jungle will fuck you again and again and again. But at that point, you're interested in it, and you kind of want to learn this challenge, and you want to get to grips with it. And I think it's very easy to kind of talk about what an easy mode would be like for all the people who currently enjoy the game, but the easy mode wouldn't be for those people. Those people would, if you can get along with a normal mode, you should. And the people who just completely bounced off it, who just think Spelunky is shit because they got killed immediately and just didn't like that experience, those people probably would like Spelunky if they were just led into it gently enough.
I guess, Spelunky is just such a pure systems game that it feels like just simplifying systems wouldn't really break it for people who are new to it. But when you have a narrative that Dark Souls does in the way it does, that would break that in interesting ways if you were to add an easy mode. But then again, if there was just hey, you want to see the castles, enjoy the castles and hit things, would that be so bad? I don't think it, even if you didn't understand the story of Dark Souls and you wouldn't get it correctly from an easy mode in Dark Souls 3, why not put it in, right?
I started talking about Spelunky, I had a thought, which is that one of the reasons these games have been enormously successful, Dark Souls and Spelunky, is that an FTL would be another game in this category that has difficulty settings, but sort of through ship types and stuff like that, is these games are kind of popular because they are really great shared experiences. A lot of the motivation to play these games or to continue playing them is the way they kind of spur people to share how they solve particular things and how they're doing with a particular thing. The buzz of playing a Souls game on day one, which actually I feel has been kind of a bit spoiled in this case by how many people have gotten that game early. I think a lot of UK retailers sent it out really early and so on. Part of that initial thrill, right, is where are you up to? And how did you solve this thing? And everyone's on the same page with it. And equally, Spelunky has that, right? There's no difference between the game that loads of you are playing, but you have different levels of mastery of it. So, your version of Spelunky, when we used to all do the daily challenge thing.
Oh, yeah.
you got like a weird sense of like where everyone was with the game, not just because of their progress, but like how they approached things and like what they'd internalized, what they hadn't internalized. Like, Tom being around here earlier, watching me kind of like fumble through a boss that I was struggling with, but like get it done. And inevitably seeing like 16 different things that I'm doing inefficiently because I'm shit at Dark Souls. Like that sort of thing is like you only get because everyone's on the same page all the time. And like, this is not necessarily an argument for games not to have multiple difficulty settings, but it's like, I like the idea that you should probably like, I don't know, that when you introduce difficulty settings like that, particularly in a world now where everyone can talk to everyone else a lot of the time about the games that they're playing, you do ultimately divide the community of people and reduce the sense of the thing as a shared experience, because if when you boot up Dark Souls, some people can pick normal mode and some people can pick easy mode or whatever, or hard mode, then a lot of those conversations can't really exist because they become really meaningless.
Sure. Yeah,
like, even dial back before you, watch me play a little bit, you said, where are you up to? And that question would be completely meaningless if that game had multiple difficulty modes.
Yeah, I think, like, in the case of Spelunky, and the kind of thing I'm thinking about is, you would just call it like training mode, and it would just be practice.
It literally has a tutorial.
Dark Souls.
No, Spelunky.
Spelunky has a tutorial. It doesn't have like a training mode.
But it is a level where you can go back to and teaches you jump distances and stuff, right?
Yeah, just the most basic thing. I don't think at the end of that you really know anything about how to complete the mines. Whereas if you could just play the mines in just with the difficulty toned down, I think the people who bounce off it's not that they didn't understand the controls or stuff like that. It's just it throws so much difficulty at you so fast that there's not that easy ramp up. Once you know the mines, the ramp up to the jungle is steep, but you can master it, and so you can get past it. And certainly from the jungle to the caves is very easy. And from then on, it's kind of like the new stuff it throws you is not so terrifying. But when you don't know anything, it just starts pretty harsh, I think, and you'd lose nothing if you just had like a training mode that was endless, that you could just keep. The problem with a pre-made tutorial for a randomized game is it doesn't prepare you for the things that the randomized system is going to throw at you. So you
for sure. It's just that, like, I don't know. I wonder how much the quality of Spelunky specifically was from, again, that sense of sharing expertise and kind of.
Yeah, but I think you can still have that with daily challenges and with the main mode, as long as it's clear that the practice thing is just a practice thing.
Because to bring it back to Mass Effect, the thing I would say is that, like, even the trivial narrative mode still doesn't reduce the game beyond the thing most people normally share about Mass Effect, because no one ever shares stories about playing the combat, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Like, they always talk about the decisions they made and the choices, like, how the story went for them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that is never removed by difficulty. Like, that is ultimately, well, actually, no, it is, because there's the action-only mode in Mass Effect, which removes all the choices from story.
Yeah, which is really weird.
So I guess, because it has both.
You have to play as a default male shepherd and the default
it's action game mode,
and you never get to make any decisions.
I didn't know they've done that. That's
it turns all
they did both ends of the spectrums.
Turns all the conversations
Don't
to
think,
cutscenes.
just kill.
So actually, I undermine my own point by pointing out the added difficulty mode that does remove all of the most shareable aspects of Mass Effect.
I wonder how many people played that.
That's interesting.
When I looked at it, I thought, I can't imagine. Like, that just seems so defeating the point.
It's kind of clever in a way because it's completely. I mean, it's not going to be. Obviously, there's going to be some sort of cost overhead in terms of like, you know,
making sure it
works and so on. But all you need to do is turn loads of incredibly complicated conversations into cutscenes, which is dead easy because they're already cutscenes. It's just you remove the things.
That's so
you
funny.
Strip out the completely complicated cast of character
holding down
system.
the one button or something.
We should do a playthrough, and no, there's an article in that. In the things that my shepherd made me do. Because
it's like, is Mass Effect good when it's just an action game?
Yeah.
Oh no. Well, I enjoyed their multiplayer thing, but no. I mean, the point of that game is...
The point of the multiplayer thing was rolling around as a big Volus with a shotgun.
Yes, yeah. Whereas, you know, you feel as though you have some sort of authorship over
it. Feels like a meeting where somebody says, like, I just can't get all the combat systems. Can we have the narrative thing? And they said, yeah, sure, well, why not? Let's let people just enjoy the narrative. And then someone said, but I only like the combat. Can't I just have a combat mode? Like, if you're going to have a narrative mode, we should have a combat mode.
With this question specifically, I feel as though I've kind of talked myself out of my original position, which is my original position would be like, yeah, give the players what they need to get into the game. But, the more you talk about it, the more you realise that difficulty can, an easy mode could break an experience of a game like Dark Souls. And it all depends. Which is the big cop-out. I don't know why I said it like that. But
why did you say it like PewDiePie?
That's the voice everyone should say it.
I don't know. This is the first question on the list as well.
Yeah, shit.
Spent a long time on this.
We should mention, actually, that Tom has furnished us with a particularly strong cocktail this evening. And it's delicious. It's
very good. We're drinking old-fashions again. You can always tell an old-fashioned podcast.
It's the M&S Cocktail Crate Craft Mixer.
I've not
spiced old-fashioned.
I've not been through this particular test, of course, but it's I'm enjoying it. It's good.
We're out of bourbon.
Causes you to talk about difficulty for a long time.
Yeah, apparently.
There's more. I've got, and it was fine.
The party continues.
Yeah. That's answer a different question. Yeah. The answer on difficulty, we don't know.
Whatever.
Keith writes. What is your greatest fear and how has it been well realized in a game? If it hasn't featured in a game, what would be a good way of incorporating your fear into a game for maximum terror? Love the podcast, Keith.
I'm scared of whales. That's one of my biggest fears. The game that triggered this for me was Jedi Knight 1, where, there's not a lot of underwater sections, but there's just, in a certain village, you can just jump in the river that's running through it, and underneath, and I think at other times in the game, there's just these huge red fish that are just very large. And whales, it's nothing about specifically whales, it's just very, very large fish. If sharks were as big as whales, I'd be even more scared of those giant sharks. Regular sharks, I'm scared of, for sure, but only the rational amount. I'm scared of them because they actually can kill me. Whereas whales, I don't think are gonna kill me, but I'm terrified of them because they're so fucking big, and it's just being in water, I know I'm out of my element, and I know they're in their element, and they're fucking enormous. And that weighing of the odds is what terrifies me. And yeah, Jedi Knight for some reason triggered that for me. But the Vive demo in which you are, exploring an underwater wreck and then at some point a giant whale swims behind you and you're prompted to turn around and you see it, did not scare me at all because it was impressive and cool. But, I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but it was just so obviously a demo. It was so completely, I knew I was just witnessing something.
Valve aren't gonna let me be killed.
I knew I wasn't kind of part of it. Whereas in Jedi Knight, this was in the middle of the game. I was already totally immersed in the idea of my connection to my avatar and how his fate was linked to mine and I could die at any time and all that stuff. And, I don't know what will happen when the first VR game where you can die has giant fish in it. I don't know what VR Subnautica
already exists. There's a demo called, I'll put it in the show, I'll send a link for the show notes. It's like Ocean Floor or something like that. I think that's wrong. Where you can just explore the ocean and you are just a scuba diver and you can meet the little fish and they swim dynamically around you, a procedural fish animation and stuff like that. But if you go to the wrong deep ocean trench, you can be eaten by a Neolithic mega shark.
So Subnautica is a game about exploring underwater areas by the natural selection to people. And it has, I don't know what they are exactly, but they're not real sharks. They are strange life forms that look like fish but with weird features. And that fucking terrifies me. I haven't played it, but
you should also
just the trailers.
We stick a link to Eurogamer's Johnny Chiodini, I believe, playing that Vive demo. He is also terrified of whales, but and continues to be terrified of whales throughout that demo. That entire series is actually really good, actually. They also have Chris Donlan playing with IKEA furniture.
Oh yeah, I did watch that.
One of the greatest VR videos I've ever seen.
We have this rack, but we use it for books. Oh no, we use it for Lady Grey tea, and they use it for books.
Very clever. I think my single biggest fear is being publicly shamed. And games have never really done that. That's it seems like a place games don't really go. They go to your character's in danger or your character is, you're always kind of right in games, you're never just, a figure of public scorn in a way that's completely out of your control.
Yeah.
Like, even, like, Fable, where you can, like, poo yourself in front of loads of people. It's still, like, you do that, and then, like, ultimately, like, 60% of the people in the village will love it. You know? Can't really think of a game.
There are games where you get, like, endings where everyone disapproves of you.
But it's disapprove of you in, like, a kind of villain way, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Normally it's like, you know, you're a kind of magnificent asshole, as opposed to, like...
You're never humiliated.
Awful, cretinous little man, which is, like, the ending I really fear. Like, no.
What if everyone looked at your Mass Effect choices and just said, lol?
And not even that, because you're ultimately a hero, you know? I don't know. Very few games have done real...
Like humiliation.
Yeah, like...
No games do that.
No, exactly.
Because the player wants to feel loved and wants to feel victorious.
You're important either way, right? You're either a hero or an asshole, but you're not... You're never just, like...
A tiny, insignificant wretch who makes the wrong decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
And is doomed to race of people to death. That should be the next Mass Effect. Andromeda.
Yeah.
The fail state.
Tom, what's your greatest fear?
I've never really categorized one. It's all the same things as everyone, like drowning and shit. That's bad. But I was thinking about the way that games have generated fear and created kind of psychosis, and I don't think games have really moved past Silent Hill 2. I think Silent Hill 2 is the most, interesting. It's the bravest horror game that's been made ever, still. Simply because of the imagery that it taps into and the themes that it taps into with its villains. Particularly, there are storylines in that game about child abuse where the child abuse is realized as a monster, as a kind of fleshy, horrifying thing strapped to a bed that pursues you around a room while you shotgun it in the face for 5 minutes. And that's really kind of stupid and reductive in a lot of ways. But I'd much rather that horror games genuinely went after these corners of, human horror. Rather than just, so for example, one of my big disappointments with, what was the guy who made Resident Evil 4 who did basically Resident Evil 4 again, but with a modern engine.
Not Miyazaki.
Fuck.
Mikami. Mikami. Yeah.
Mikami's latest thing.
Evil Within.
Evil Within, which is,
As in where the evil lives. Yeah. As in the Resident Evil.
Yeah. And that game's really cool, actually. It's a really fucking cool game. But all of its monsters are lifted from movies. Whereas all of Silent Hill's monsters are lifted from a psychological idea, this bedrock idea that you're going to explore the inner horrors and the deepest nightmares of the people who wander into the town. They then become mannequins, and they then become these horrendous fleshy demons. And nothing has done that. Like everything, all the horror games I've played have borrowed from movies, from movie imagery, and none of them have actually thought about, how do you create interactive horror? And interactive horror is amazing because in a horror film, you can close your eyes, you can put your hands over your ears. In a horror game, you choose to walk into that room where the bad shit is going to happen. And that choice of having to move on, having to push forwards, having to put yourself into that scenario is a really powerful element of interactive horror. And I feel it's so underused constantly.
You say that. So one of my actual other phobias, so I'd say my two greatest fears are public shaming and the alien from Aliens. Like, legitimately, like, when I was a kid, I used to have, I think I saw that film a bit too young. I used to have recurring nightmares that I was being hunted by the alien from Alien.
And he was publicly shaming you on Twitter.
Publicly shaming me.
Like, lol, look at this idiot.
He's like an egg, but that.
Like,
he's an egg on Twitter.
The Twitter alien egg.
The cross split at the top.
That's a really high concept joke. But yeah, and actually when I was a kid, the way I would get out of that dream is by just letting the alien kill me. This is a weird thing to admit.
Wow.
But, I would just stand up in the middle of the corridor, rather than hide, I would just just fucking end it. And it would, whatever, disembowel me with its tail or something.
Let Viscera cleanup detail deal with this.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the many reasons I love Alien Isolation is because it was the only game that allowed you to do exactly that. Obviously you can be killed by aliens in any of the AVP games or Colonial Marines or whatever, where you just let them kind of scratch at you until you run out of health. But that was never the point of the ending of the dream. It was like the fact that it just fucking eliminates you straight away.
Yeah.
Whereas you know, that game is terrifying, and it does do that thing of horror that horror games do particularly well, of forcing you to be the one that enters the dangerous situation and enters the room and hides under the cupboard and hopes the alien doesn't see you. This kind of AI-led beast. But it also allows you to do that thing where you just give up. Like, you're just like, fuck it. Fuck this tension. Fuck feeling this scared and stressed.
Yeah.
Just standing up in the middle of the corridor, like lighting a flare and being like, you know, come and impale me, you
bitch.
son of a bitch. So yeah, those are my two greatest fears, and one of them's been really well realised in the game now, so thanks to Creative Assembly for that one.
Yeah, and one is about to be realised by virtual reality. Good times for Chris going forward.
Did you see that amazing, it was a tweet, I don't know how true it was, but it looked very true, because it was quite a graphic tweet, of a man who posted an Instagram photo of himself recovering in hospital after he'd been found unconscious on his bathroom floor as he attempted to have an autoerotic asphyxiation wank in VR.
Really?
Yep.
I think I did see this picture and quickly closed the tab.
Yeah. So that's the kind of world of public shaming that
we can look forward to
the
in
VR
our glorious future.
give. Yeah, like I don't think he tried
more.
to strangle himself with the Vive cable, but that might actually be the first practical use of that cable anyone's found.
Yeah.
Should we?
That's a good second question, wasn't it?
That was our second question.
Yeah, good.
Moving swiftly on.
Anthony writes, and he opens his email with a quote in Swedish, which I imagine is Dear Kraken Crowbar. He says this is appropriate because Marsh is now in Sweden. However, I am not going anywhere fucking near trying to pronounce that. So, I was playing through Dragon Age Inquisition recently, and while I enjoyed the character interaction, every fight with lots of mobs of enemies was a boring chore. I then moved on to Dragon's Dogma and realized that its character classes and their abilities were virtually identical to those in Inquisition. But by using Monster Hunter's combat models as a framework to build on, it felt much more satisfying as a moment-to-moment experience, and I ended up wishing that Inquisition had used the same system. So my question is this: which game mechanics would you like to see grafted from one game into another in order to fix their worst features? Keep up the podding, and thanks for reading. Anthony. P.S. Any chance Tom Senior and Rich Stanton can be corralled into doing a Dark Souls 3 run on the YouTubes? On that latter point.
Chris and I may have some ideas.
Yeah, might be that Tom and I do something like that.
No promises, but stay tuned.
Indeed. On
What
the point.
did he say that Dragon's Dogma did that Dragon Age didn't?
So Dragon's Dogma basically like kind of lifts loads of ideas from Monster Hunter's combat system. So it has, even though it's a big stodgy RPG with lots of RPG things in it, it has, and actually to be honest, Monster Hunter is a big stodgy RPG with lots of RPG things in it. It lifts a particularly good system from another game in order to enliven what could have been just a boring action bar cooldown based thing. Yeah. I'm trying to think game mechanics I like to see graphed from, like, the obvious answer to this in almost every case is combat systems. Because, you know, like, there's probably not going to be very many, like, medieval combat games that wouldn't benefit from having Dark Souls' combat system rather than the combat system they actually have.
Yeah.
Like,
it's really true.
It's like,
It's really true.
because it's just better, really, in a lot of ways. It's harder, but it's more gratifying.
Or actually, Batman Arkham Asylum's combat system can more or less go into any game that has action, like one versus many combat, you know. And it did, you know, Shadow of Mordor basically just takes it wholesale.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad it did, because it's great.
The thing I find hard about this question is trying to figure out the game with the deficiency that I want fixed with the system. Because I can think of good examples of, you know, as you say, melee combat or shooting or whatever, but it's figuring out, like, what game... Because, I mean, it's really easy to say, wouldn't it be amazing if you bolted, like, a good shooter's shooting onto Deus Ex? Because then you can call that game Human Revolution or whatever, but
it's tough.
Obviously, I always want Gunpoint save system on every game, because that's why I made Gunpoint save system, which is like save every 5 seconds, keep the last 3 or actually it keeps more or less all of your auto saves ever, so you never really lose any progress. And that's, Hyperlight Drifter have that. I'd be super into Hyperlight Drifter.
That's true.
So many games, I'd be really into them if I never had to repeat myself for more than 5 seconds.
You did actually fix that for yourself, didn't you, in the one game that's been fully fixed for you?
And it's funny, like, it doesn't... Some people really like it. A lot of people just don't comment on it or have any reaction to it at all. No one's ever hated it, as far as I know. No one's ever told me that, like, that ruined Gunpoint for them. Like,
they
no
wanted
one's ever
checkpoints.
Said.
They wanted...
Yeah,
bonfires.
I mean, maybe those people just don't play the game at all. But I sort of expected it would be controversial. I sort of expected it would be like... Before I made it, I heard loads of people. In fact, like, so Mark of the Ninja is another stealth game that has a lot of similar elements to Gunpoint. And my reaction to it is I really like the mechanics, but I had so many situations where checkpoints set me back too far and I was sick of repeating myself. Derek Yu, creator of Spelunky, specifically complained on Twitter to say, the checkpoints are so frequent that there's no stakes and I don't care about my progress at all. And so he and I just had the absolute opposite reaction. And so when I did, rapid saves in Gunpoint, I thought, well, I'll get loads of people, hating this because it takes away all of the stakes that they like from having those infrequent checkpoints. No one's ever said that. I've never heard of that.
I think it's interesting. Like, I think that kind of has to be how it works in any, specifically the stealth game, where failure can go very badly very quickly. Like, there's not a lot of gradation of failure in Gunpoint. Like, you can't be like wounded but still capable.
Yeah,
like, you've been shot and you're dead now, right? Like,
death.
Whereas like in a stealth game, like more like something like Deus Ex, where something can go wrong, but now you've entered an alarm state and you still have options, but it's changed. Like, that's where I think being able to just like rewind to undo the mistake might take some of the tension out of it a little bit, because it's like, I don't know, maybe it's a hard thing to visualize, but it's like those kinds of instant rewind things work really super well when it's obvious that's what you're going to do because you've been shot dead. You know what I mean? Whereas like sometimes the good thing about a stealth game is like improvising your way out of a mistake.
Yeah, that's true.
Which would would be not as good if you could just go like, oh no, sorry, and then take it back.
I mean, Deus Ex weirdly has no autosaves ever. The entire game. If you complete if you get to the last level of the game without ever manually saving, and then you die, you got to start again from level 1. It never autosaves, not even at the end of a level, which is bizarre. And it tells you it is. It actually, like, every time you move to a new area, it says saving, and then it says loading, and it's not saving. There's no save.
It lied.
It's such bullshit.
It's quite funny.
So you have to remember to manually autosave, manually quick save, which is terrible. But yeah.
I think generally, I would like to see more of the tactile, impactful sense of interaction that you get from Relic games and Blizzard games applied to, for example, 4X games, where everything is very, very placid and everything's about clicking and gently kind of moving things along. But I think there's lots and lots of room for really satisfying click interactions with things that just aren't applied. So if you're going to launch a doomsday device in a 4X game on a planet, that should be a fucking amazing, impactful fucking thing. And it never is. It never is. And I wish that 4X designers would look at what a Relic airstrike looks like. And then when you click that, just replicate it, just fucking copy it. just, look at how that feels, and, how, when you do something impactful in a game like Wipeout or Planet, it should feel like you're doing that. And there should be more kind of cross-genre learnings about this, especially in strategy games.
I'd like, actually thinking about that, you sort of made me think about it with 4X. I'd like to see, I want to see another MMO do what Eve did particularly well, and in a very specific way, like, because I completely understand why Eve is completely unique in it being this total sandbox, and every other MMO nowadays, to the degree that the genre still exists, is more and more of a kind of theme park leveling experience where you kind of log on to a big box that's the same for everybody. And even the games that attempt with a little bit of dynamic stuff around the fringes of that, like The Division, it's still hyper limited in what it can achieve, that kind of thing. The thing I think that is fundamentally really super interesting about Eve that should work for any game, but just makes it maybe a little bit harder, is that everything comes from the players. That, like, the game never really cheats and injects resources into the game. That there are rewards and missions and NPCs and AI to kill and stuff like that, but ultimately the entire game, all the ships you fly, the ammunition you fire, all that stuff ultimately stems from the actions of players. Like, I think it's possible to build loads of different types of games on that basis. Like, you can have...
Yeah. It's
just that allows this crazy freedom. So the reason I've been thinking about this a lot is because I read Andrew Groen's book.
Awesome.
History of the Great Empires of Eve.
Got that myself.
Read and finished it. And, like, it's a really interesting book because it's the only time... I mean, there's a lot of video game books out there. There's a lot of essays about video games and criticism and so on. This is just a history book about some stuff that happened in a game.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really, to its great credit, doesn't concern itself too much with the big question of, like, but what does this mean?
What it means, right?
Like, it's just like, this happened, right? Some spaceship things happen. And, you know, I think there are things in that book where it's like, actually inadvertently makes a case for, like, game history is different to real history in some ways, like, and they have, you know, and you can't, maybe it loses a bit of its grandeur because it's like, and this battle was lost because nobody wanted to log in. But all it is a history of a very specific part of Eve at a very specific time. Like, it doesn't even talk about what was happening in the actual sort of scripted part of Eve, like Empire space, for that entire era. It's just what was happening in the most sandboxy part of the sandbox over a course of about 6 years. And what I really like about that is it establishes that obviously it's a fascinating story, but in the space around that story is essentially all of the rest of Eve. And the fact remains that that incredible story, which has been worth writing a book about 10 years later, exists simply because the developers bolted on like a side event to the actual game. They bolted on a big load of empty space that players could fight over if they wanted, and added some mechanics to let them do so. But functionally, the rest of the game was happening in non-nullsec space. It was happening in the part of the game where it was all fed into the same simulation, but where there's a much more structured experience going on. And that to me proves that, like, maybe the conception of Eve is like this total Wild West, whereas every other game is Civilization, is actually a bit of a wrong one. Like, more games, if they were more ambitious, could adopt some of Eve's ideas with regards to having everything be generated by the community, so that they can then offer two experiences. They can offer the kind of more structured, fun game that you play with your mates, but also this crazy, completely freeform thing where, you know, actual history can be generated. Like, the only other game that's even come close to that is Star Wars Galaxies.
Yeah. I think Eve has a good way of doing it in that it can do it by, you know, how close this system is to civilization space, to empire space. And, you know, the further away you go, the less security, the less police enforcement there is, and therefore the more players can kill each other and fight for territory. And probably one of the reasons that it's easy for Eve to do it is that its actual, like, content, its locations are just stars and planets, and those are probably pretty easy to generate. Like, they can probably just make as many as they like, and therefore you can have a huge area that's all civilized and police enforced, and where new players can get to grips with what they're doing. And that's where all my Eve career took place. I was just trading minerals in totally civilized space where no pirates could ever attack me without being instantly destroyed by the police, and still support all of this huge space where, you know, the regions that players are fighting over. I didn't even realize until I read that book, Empires of Eve, which I haven't finished yet, but I just started. I didn't sort of have an idea of how massive the space they're talking about is. It's just these thousands and thousands of stars.
7,300 stars,
right.
I think.
Holy shit.
And they're all linked by jump gates, and one of the opening stories of the book is about the war for just this one system that is the only link to these 8 other systems. And if these Russian players can just hold this one system, then they can, you know, lock off this whole region of space. And that kind of only comes about if you have a huge amount of territory to play with. Probably if you had to hand design every one of those systems, you wouldn't be quite so willing to just say, like, oh, this huge chunk of space is going to be totally up to players.
For sure, like, space is a very good way of doing this sort of system, but on different levels, like, I don't know, it feels like it's weird that it's only for one game that's justified this, like.
And I feel like it's paid off. You know, I can't remember.
No one's writing history books about anything else.
Yeah, I haven't heard stats in a long time, but I remember for a very long time the thing that you could say about EVE was it's the only MMO that's always grown. I don't know if that's still true, but
that's what I heard. It's been stable around 500,000.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but like long after World of Warcraft started shrinking, EVE was still growing.
But I mean, like World of Warcraft was like
12 million.
12 million.
Yeah. And when it started to drop, it was like 7 million.
Comparatively, and especially with the Plex system, if you consider the number of people actually paying money day by day, like EVE is a different proposition from any other MMO.
Yeah.
And there's, I think that the reason why the wild zones work in EVE is because you have civilized zones, and that's why something like Rust might struggle to ever support the same system, is because you need like a universe where there is civilization and there are rules that you can then exploit to create your empire in a way. And that's the genius of EVE is.
Yeah. It's structural, but it's what I like about it is that it shows that you can have both. You know, that these, like, because the stories people tell about EVE are always stories about nullsec. No one ever really tells a story about Empire Space because that's just where newbies live. You know,
that enables everything.
But it still exists, right? Like that's the point. Yeah. Like, and that's the, like, I don't know. Every other MMO is a game that's just Empire Space. And I would like some of those games to figure out how to make their systems robust to the point where you can then say, what does non-Empire Space look like in our game?
There are gradations in EVE as well. Like the security that, you know, there are security latches that you go through as you go away. As Tom was saying, like, Tom was mining in safe space, and you can mine in safe space to support a nullsec crusade, right? Mm. And that,
you can also be killed in safe space.
You can, definitely. Yeah, if the corp has enough power. And that's fascinating as well. But I think you kind of have to build a society to enable that type of drama to exist. And as a financial proposition, if you're building a new game, that's probably not what you're going to be aiming for. You're going to be aiming for...
No, I know.
You know, something much larger. Because EVE is relatively, by old school MMO standards, a smallish game.
But if you think about other MMOs that started around that time, World of Warcraft's still going, that's about it. Everything else died, right?
Yeah, sure. But everything else just copied World of Warcraft.
Yeah, exactly.
And then wasn't as good as it. So, you know...
I guess that's the point. Like, it's not like, because obviously the question was ultimately like, what mechanics would you bolt onto the games? Like, kind of the thing I have in my mind is like, what does World of Warcraft look like if everything is systems driven? If all equipment comes from players? Like, how does that change the fundamental nature of that game? And like, what does it allow you to do in terms of
Warcraft has this weird thing where like the crafting systems, the ways you turn raw materials into useful materials in theory, is so incentivized itself that the raw materials to make like a piece of leather armor will be worth more than the leather armor is, because there are so many people who have leatherworking and want to level up leatherworking. They want the raw materials so they can make the leatherworking thing, and then by making it, they practice their leatherworking and they level up in leatherworking. And so the actual finished product is almost valueless because so many people want to do leatherworking and want to produce this thing that if you can provide them with a couple of scraps of leather, that's more valuable than the thing they produce. So like, craftsmanship in World of Warcraft is reducing some valuable raw materials into a valueless item so that you can level up your skill.
Valueless jerkin. Bit like that guy in the VR helmet.
That was question 3 then.
That was question 3. Dan writes, what do you guys think about traps in games? I don't mean the stuff that seems to permeate every action RPG designed exclusively to annoy and sap health at ill-timed moments, but rather weapons and devices for players to use like mines in Bethesda Fallouts or razor tripwires in Dishonored. I love sneaking into enemy buildings in Fallout New Vegas and strategically planting mines for unsuspecting super mutants to stumble across. What other games feature traps and stealthy weapons like this that the player can take advantage of? Any stories of using traps in games to satisfying effect? Thanks for the awesome pod. P.S. Please don't leave us ever again. Cheers, Dan.
We missed a week.
Sorry, we missed a week.
Traps are very much my style in these games.
You were saying you made a game about traps, Tom.
I did kind of make it a game about turning things into traps. But I, like when I'm playing things like Deus Ex and Dishonored and Far Cry, there is always trap items, and I don't use them nearly as much as you might think, given that it's how I want to play. The problem is almost all traps are things where you place them in a particular position, and then when an enemy walks in that position, then that's when it triggers. And for that kind of setup to work, you need to know the enemy's whole patrol route, then you need to be in the place where the enemy would normally walk, and unseen, and have some time to do something. And in particularly in Far Cry Primal, which I'm playing a lot lately, there's a trap thing, it's just literally called a trap. And you place it on the ground, and I think if it goes off, it kills someone. The reason I don't know for sure is I've never successfully used it against another human being, because if I'm in the place where that's on their patrol route, I'll probably just kill them. I'll probably just hide in a bush and then do a stealth takedown, drag them into the bush, and I know for sure that I'll kill them. I know for sure where their body is. I know for sure I can drag it into the bush and get rid of it. And it's just so rare to be in a position where it's better to place a trap than to do your melee takedown or whatever other ways you have of taking out a person. The one time it really works in Deus Ex is that, it's still only for one very particular playstyle, but Deus Ex has alarm panels, and if people run 2 alarm panels, I guess you could do this in Far Cry as well, I haven't tried it, but if someone sees you, they're going to run to an alarm panel, and so if you want to do things stealthily, but if they're not going to go stealthily, you want to make sure they go well, then you can plant a proximity grenade on the alarm panel and then carry on trying to be stealthily. And then if someone does spot you, they won't shoot at you, they'll run to the alarm panel. When they run to the alarm panel, the explosive you put on them will kill them and also destroy the alarm panel so no one else can ever trigger it. And I guess in Far Cry Primal, you can still place traps, and there are alarms, there are horns that people can run to. It doesn't work quite as well because there are also people who can trigger horns by themselves. But if you put a trap next to a horn, that might work, maybe.
The thing about traps, I think, fundamentally, is that you have the choice between your primary weapons and a trap. And your primary weapons do direct damage. And a trap does potential damage. But the trap's potential damage is almost always equal to your primary weapon damage.
Yeah.
So you're always just going to go for the direct approach because it does the same amount of damage.
Yeah.
So if you leave a trap and it happens to be triggered, what you do is you damage a bunch of enemies. It doesn't even necessarily kill them outright in most games where traps are involved. Particularly, this even applies to not 4X games. AI, old school RPG games like Baldur's Gate, like Pillars of Eternity, where you can have trap classes, even Diablo 2, where the assassin you could have a trap build assassin. Yeah. But why would you ever, when, her just shooting people would do exactly the same amount of damage without the chance element? And this is always the problem with traps where, you can be really clever. You can try to second guess the AI and where they might walk, and they might walk over it. And then they'll take the equivalent of a bolt of damage, as if you'd shot them. Well, guess what? Perhaps
another way you can
perhaps go the other way.
There was a class in Titanfall. No, wait.
Titan Quest.
Titan Quest.
Oh
yes.
Yeah.
Prepare for Titan Quest.
Which Titan Quest had a really cool class system where you can combine any 2 classes you like.
Yes.
So there'd be 8 or 10 classes, and you can combine any combination
Really
of those.
quick. Love that game.
And so I was rogue and dreamer or something, and
I'm a rogue dreamer.
like in real life.
I'm a beat poet.
I was going to say, you've multi-classed twat.
I can't remember if it was even called rogue, but the trap class, it wasn't very good. But the thing you could do is you could throw out they called it a trap, but really it was a pillar that span round with propellers for some reason, and it would fire bolts at anyone who went anywhere near it. And the bolts didn't do a huge amount of DPS, but because you didn't really risk yourself by placing these, they could whittle down enemies. And there was, I don't even know if this was a bug or an exploit or an actual tactic, but in Titanfall, like in Diablo, there's a key you can hold that says, don't move my character, just attack where I'm saying.
Yeah.
And normally traps have a range of 10 meters or whatever. And so if you say, cast a trap there, your character will move to within 10 meters and then throw the trap out and it'll land 10 meters away. If you hold the shift button or whatever, then they just stay where they are and throw them as far as you like.
Really?
And so you can just throw them to the very edge of the screen. Obviously you can't click off screen, but you can click to the extents of the screen, and then the trap can attack enemies that haven't seen you, and you haven't seen them, and that just became my default way of getting through Titan Quest. I just played most of the game by throwing traps way ahead of me, whittling down them. It gets super fucking hard. I don't know what the good builds are, but other than this trap thing, I had nothing going for me. So if I was in a direct fight, I was going to lose. The only way I could win was by throwing out these traps before people could actually attack me, and it would whittle them down, and then I could go on and fight the remnants.
Yeah, I had 7 wolves. Then I got to a point where is
that like druid or something?
It's like druid plus wolves. So it's like, my main class is druid, my second class is wolves. I can't remember the precise combination of things, but I'd roll with 7 wolves, and then there was a point where the 7 wolves got immediately killed every time I went to any combat.
Yeah.
And then my guy I put all my points into wolves. That's it. That's all gone. I've got nothing else. All I do is wolves, and that's the end of the game. Really. I do love.
It's not a well balanced.
I love Titan Quest, but yeah, it definitely has those problems. Have we answered this question? What was the question?
Guess I can't remember. I've scrolled past it now, so it's too late. Matt writes, with the upcoming release of Deus Ex Mankind Divided, I had a thought that might be contentious with you, Tom F. especially. Since these prequels seem to be rapidly surpassing the technology level of the original games, would it be beneficial for Square Enix to retcon the series to officially remove Deus Ex and Invisible War from continuity? Since these games seem so different, I feel that future stories could become constrained by the older games in order to tie them all together. Discuss. Thanks for treading, everybody.
I love it when people say discuss like it's like an essay question. Personally, I think I like having those old characters around in the fiction, so that they can do little nods to them and do I think playful things with them.
Whatever negative effect that there is of having the prequels have more advanced technology than the sequels has already been passed. Like, we've already done it. Like, Human Revolution already has amazing orgs. Like, just its whole org system is good, and Deus Ex's org system is bad. Almost all.
I can swim faster.
Yeah, exactly. Like, swim faster. There's a hacking org. It doesn't make any sense. There's a regen org that's the one that really is powerful, but it's so powerful it just breaks the game. If you have the regen org, you can just turn that on at all times, and you have infinite health now, and almost nothing can hurt you. The org system in Deus Ex 1 is basically broken. I love that game, but the org system does not work. The skill system is great, like where you upgrade things to, it's not great, but it has its moments. But the org system is just really arbitrary, and the difference in power between various orgs is completely out of whack. Whereas Human Revolution, I think, made a really good RPG system where, every time you get a practice point, it's a really tough decision as to where do I put this, because there's so many things I want, and they're all so good. And so, the abilities you get are just mostly better than Deus Ex, and you know what? Didn't bother me at all. I love that game. I love Deus Ex. I love them both. I love the connection between the two. I really like going through the news networks HQ and hacking all these emails and finding out sometimes there'll just be an email where there's one word in it that references Deus Ex 1, and you realise, oh shit, this is the setup for that other thing.
Yeah.
And at no point did I think, but hang on, that other thing involved people with mech orgs that weren't as good as these mech
exactly
orgs.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. That's a worthwhile trade-off.
Yeah.
There's some, instability in the canon of the various technologies that we're using. No one cares. No one cares. If you can reference, Gunther or, JC, it's worth just preserving the old lore just for that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Woo.
Right, Godzilla writes, Dear Agony Aunt, in the weekend I had a dream where you were podding in a big bed like Charlie Bucket's family. I walked into the room with my hood on, and Chris jumped out of the bed and pulled the tightening strings on my hoodie, rendering me blind.
Oh, goodness.
We had a brutal fist fight while the Toms cheered and threw things at us. Eventually I ended up beating Chris and was allowed entrance to the bed as a guest podder while Chris left.
We'd just like to clarify, this is not how the podcast entry system works.
Nor how the big bed works. Everyone is welcome in the big bed that we're all currently in.
Absolutely.
Also, yeah, you really don't get into the pod by defeating me in single combat. Because that would mean that recently I'd fought Alex Wiltshire and Pip.
And John Roberts.
Although Pip did punch me in her sleep the other night. So apparently she's on the podcast now.
She'll be on next week as a result of this.
That was her,
Entrance
access
exam.
ceremony.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
This sounds like DLC for condemned criminal lawyers.
Just to fucking beat me up.
Pulling someone's hoodie so that they can't see and then beating them savagely.
What was the question?
The question, I haven't gone to the question yet. The question is, are the subliminal messages you put in the podcast agreed by all? What's the worst game dream you've ever had? I think I found mine. Thanks a lot, Raritz Godzilla.
I thought his dream sounded quite positive. He ended up on the podcast. What more could you hope for?
This made me think of Axiom Verge, which I talked about this on many podcasts ago when I talked about Axiom Verge with you, Tom, actually. I mentioned briefly that it gave me nightmares, and it did with its textures. And the nightmare was being inside the rooms full of fleshy, like pale coloured, tumorous walls forever. And just being unable to escape and being in a maze of them. Mazes, pretty standard for nightmares.
Yeah.
Not an unusual nightmare, not an interesting one really, but it did answer the question. Which is why I'm on this podcast.
Easy
The
there.
bare minimum required.
Easy. Put down.
A lot of justification for that.
I had a weird fucking dream. This is game related, but it's more related to the X-Wing miniatures game that I play and that Tom, you also play.
Very good.
I had a dream where I went over to my collection and like most of it was like in pieces, like everything had broken in kind of weird ways. And I have super glue and I was like gluing stuff back together, but as I tried to glue it back together, it all peeled apart like onion layers. Like each individual piece was like made up of tiny layers, literally of like onion skin that like peeled apart piece by piece in my hands until I was left with nothing.
But the X-Wing is just...
Yeah, like
My life's work.
it was actually like a B-wing peeling apart in my hands like a tiny onion. And that was...
I can imagine it's almost like an anime scene where they blow away and they become petals.
Yeah, exactly. It was,
They dissolve in the sunlight.
Oniony petals.
Yeah.
It was really weird.
Wow.
And I wouldn't really want to guess at what that meant.
Damn.
I do have video game dreams, but I don't think I've ever had a bad one. They've always been about, like, the time when I dream about video games when I'm really excited about it. And sometimes when it's just out, but more often when it's about to come out. Like, a video game is never more powerful in my mind when I haven't played it. And it's, imminent, and I'm super excited about it. One of the most vivid ones was about Deus Ex Human Revolution, but before I played it. Like, when I was waiting on review code, and it was just, like, constantly in my thoughts, and I hadn't played any of it, but I'd seen bits of it at, private demo events, and so I had enough to go on for my mind to work with, and to meant like, oh yeah, you played it totally, man, and it was like this, and it had this cool silenced pistol, and it felt really good. It's kind of pathetic.
Mostly when games filter into my dreams, it tends to be like pattern games, where I've been playing something like Ikarika or Geometry Wars.
Yeah.
And
You can't escape it, yeah.
That thing where you close your eyes and the patterns are still kind of working away. And that's, yeah.
I dream laning phases in Dota for that reason.
Oh, really?
Louis writes, I think it's Louis, might be Lewis. We'll find out. I was just hearing a discussion on how Steam sales train consumers to wait for sales to buy the games, and how that can be counteracted by making games that have added value closer to the launch period. You talked about how multiplayer games tend to be like that, but the big problem is that single player tends to lead towards the opposite these days, with stuff like bug fixing, balancing, free content updates, DLC, mods, etc. Some games provide a significantly better experience several months after launch, or even years from launch. I love Darkest Dungeon, and I bought the game a couple of weeks after launch. I played the game for a while, but the game is now sitting idle in my Steam library, waiting for all the features promised in the content roadmap to come out. I don't want to just play the full game I don't want to just play the full game twice to experience it at its best, so I'm kind of regretful that I didn't wait a couple of months to buy it. I feel the same for Pillars of Eternity. I played the game at launch, backed it on Kickstarter, but eventually they released some big balance updates and DLC months after I finished the game, and I was left with the same feeling that I would have had a better experience if I'd waited a couple of months to play. Yeah. I have a job, so my time for games is limited, so I want to experience a game at its best. And if I wait anyway to play it, I might as well buy it a couple of months down the line when it's cheaper. Just wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. Like, if you're time limited and you really want to play the final thing, just wait. And really, especially if there's a content roadmap. And if you look at that content roadmap, and you see a load of features that you like and that you think should probably be in it, just leave it alone.
Yeah, I think it's, ideally the developer should be planning their stuff so that launch is the best time to play it. Like, you want to get the stuff over with in early access. If there's things that are really missing or broken about it, you need to find that out before launch. And what's interesting is that Darkest Dungeon was in early access, so that game had that chance to do that.
Right.
So I got super into it myself yet, so I don't know what the content roadmap involves. But yeah, I have exactly the same feeling, which is I don't want to play games. I have so little time to play the number of games that I want to play that I'm only going to give each one chance. So I don't play early access because if I'm going to give it one chance, then early access is a bad time to do it because I might be put off by something that's just unfinished about it. And in that case, I'm not going to come back to it when it is finished and it won't get a fair chance from me. So I take release as being the time when the developer is saying, this is the best time to play it.
Yep.
And if they're wrong about that, then that's their fault.
For sure, yeah.
Good point.
Vanilla Nougat writes, Dear Kate and Omar, in episode 135, the cast spent some time lamenting the apparent futility of finding the sublime in video games, positing that the medium of virtual space might be inherently incapable of producing that awesome sauce we crave. The awesome sauce he's referring to is the awesome sauce referred to by Wordsworth.
And Blake and all his contemporaries. Good.
Awesome
The awesome sauce. Yeah, that's brilliant. I should have put that in my essay.
Sauce is awesome. Awesome sauce. That's all you know and all you need to know.
Brilliant.
John Keats. Ode to an awesome sauce. Anyway, to continue. Fortunately, I believe there may be evidence to the contrary. Recently, so to actually, before I read this part of the email, to expand on that, to say that what we were arguing was that, so in a capital R romantic sense of the sublime, which is all about sort of these unknowable sort of aesthetic expanses that you kind of can just glimpse in your day-to-day life, but that kind of fill your mind with awe, awesome sauce. The games struggle with this because they're basically deterministic, right? Like, you can see an amazing mountain in Skyrim, but it's ultimately just a part of a level geometry.
Yeah.
That everything is finite in a game in a way that it might not appear to be in real life. He goes on to say, fortunately, I believe there may be evidence to the contrary. Recently, I've been rereading William Gibson's Neuromancer for the umpteenth time, and it struck me that Gibson's description of the landscape of cyberspace in that novel perfectly fit your working definition of the sublime. This does, of course, beg the question if such a thing could ever exist outside of fiction, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. Thanks for listening, everybody. Vanilla Nougat. He also goes on to say, P.S. In nearly all of his essays on literature and film, Gibson talks at length about the concept of liminality and the liminal, so maybe there's actually a deeper connection somewhere here.
We failed to look up Gibson's precise paragraphs on this, so it's hard to answer.
Well, like,
I also have reread Neuromancer recently, so it's...
that's good.
Yeah,
I read it many years ago, but yeah.
Like, the thing about, so, you know, in those kind of early cyberpunk novels, when they're kind of positing, like, computer space as this kind of, like, amazing, mind-blowing other territory.
Yeah.
Like, you're still talking about a literary conception of a kind of incredible experience. Like, there's no reliance in that book or elsewhere within that genre on reflecting the actual capabilities of software at any point. Like, you know, and also in the perspective of the characters that experience this stuff, you're talking about an experiential sense of something. material, which is exactly what the Sublime is about. Like, it's something like, I don't think it changes anything about what we originally said, because Neuromancer is a book, and literature is really good at doing this. Games aren't really, not yet.
No. I've always felt like, whenever I've read Sublime literature, it's always been about nature.
Yeah.
Fundamentally about nature and about the way nature is, perceived in the real world. And your perception might be flawed. You might only see a corner of this mountain. But the idea is that the mountain is bigger and greater than you are. And that idea that if you were to confront it would horrify you, you can't do that in a game, because it's what we said. It's exactly what we said before, is that the Skyrim mountain is a man-made mountain. And at the end of the day, you could do the stupid diagonal walk up it, and you could see, or you can no-cam it and wander around it and see every aspect of it. And you can count the polygons and you can quantify it. And the point of the Sublime is that it's the unquantifiable, and games just haven't done that yet. And I think it's really hard to do that.
I think he's right to identify it in William Gibson's work, but he's also identifying it still within literature.
Precisely.
So nature in traditional conceptions of Sublime is basically like the great unknowable past, right? Like nature is this gigantic natural force that, predates us and is much bigger than us in all these different ways. And a really interesting about science fiction, particularly cyberpunk, or concepts of AI or anything like that, is that it presents a great big unknowable force that's ahead of us instead, which is just a different way of, it's the other nature, is like this kind of artificial nature that spreads out in front of us in the form of virtual reality and that kind of thing. None of that is true of real software at the moment.
No.
It's also interesting, actually, that he draws upon, when William Gibson in film criticism talks about liminality, liminal just means of light, right? It's particularly relevant to film criticism, because film is entirely a medium of light. It's a projected image. It's not the actuality of those images. It's not the set that it was recorded on. It's not the actual actors. It is their, a picture of them being broadcast through a projector to an audience. Games aren't like that, because games are both kind of like liminal and physical at the same time, which actually grounds them in a way. Like, you're always going to be interacting with a game through a keyboard or a pad or a mouse or something. Like, it's not like a film, which is purely this sort of transitory visual thing. It's this kind of down in the mud, actually steering a camera around a space deal. So everything about games, I think, fights that sense of liminality, as he says, or subliminality.
I think the very act of level design of being in a 3D environment where you can create space, like even Bryce, remember Bryce back in the day? Even any sort of level, geometry design, you've already lost it. Like, you're never going to capture it. Like, it's already gone, because like the whole idea of this entire concept is that you encounter something that, again, I've said this before in the other podcast, is the temporal dimension, is this thing that has existed before you and will exist after you forever. And that is a part of the Sublime. It's a part of the, and if you find a mountain in a game, someone made that. And they
someone
made it.
Someone in a big great building in Maryland made that.
Yeah. Someone a year ago in Maryland made that. And that tells, and that's the difference between encountering, like the idea of the mountain as a god compared to you, will never exist in games, because everything is so clearly man-made, and it's so, obviously, crafted.
Until we're all floating around in like VR soup controlled by AIs creating the future for us,
the Sublime will not, will not exist.
Not really. To finish up, Thomas writes, and this is just to kind of give us a little bit of tonal splash of cold water in the face.
Good.
What's your best experience of installing a game? And can it be done better than Red Alert 2 on CDs?
Fucking yes.
It's just it's an alarming question, because I haven't even thought about that for about 10 years. Like, it used to be a big deal. When you had 5 CDs and you had to keep switching them in, and each one would take 10 minutes.
Oh, did you guys play Monkey Island on floppy disks?
I played Monkey Island 2.
Back in the day, 12 to 14 floppy disks for an adventure game.
Didn't they have like meta jokes in it too, where like if you fell off a certain cliff, it would say, please insert disc 16, and there was no disc 16.
There were jokes about that, yeah, sure. So better than that then, you know.
Were you saying Command and Conquer had a good one?
He was saying Command and Conquer had a good one.
Oh, he did.
The questioner.
Well, any Steam install experience is better than, you know, the preceding 30 years of installation. But actually, Blizzard do very good installations where you can play the game while it's still installing. And there are some flaws to this, but for the most part with Blizzard, I think, I'm talking about Diablo 3, where you can play loads of Diablo 3 before it's even fully in there. I think, Chris, you were talking about Overwatch?
StarCraft 2.
Oh, StarCraft 2.
Like, StarCraft 2 is a good thing where it gives you like a fucking PowerPoint presentation about the entire StarCraft universe while you install it, which is actually really useful because that game has a lot of lore.
Yeah, lots of lore there. Good.
Lots of lore.
Do they do that for the expansions? Because there's...
Yeah, they do. Because they're all treated as standalone games, so they have a big old fucking lore off. Trying to think of anyone else who does it well, but no one needs to anymore. Like, I mean, Jesus.
There's the download time, but then they don't get to control that because it's in the background in Steam or in Origin or whatever. So they don't get to like author it. So I guess you could argue, it would be a weak argument, but you could argue that the install, like entertaining the user during the install process is a lost art because the install process is no longer the actual time consuming thing. It's
but
the
even
download process.
Even at the time when it was relevant, it wasn't an art that many people chose to participate in, right?
No, it was a rudimentary art.
I've got to hold it. I think Zool 2 had a breakout minigame during loading zones, maybe, where you played as the dog with two heads on either side, and he was the platform by which you deflected bullets in this breakout game.
I'd like to also spare a thought for an era in software development where someone would actually, literally on purpose, call something the install shield wizard.
God, that's taking me back.
Can you imagine, like, everything has, you know, the goal for software now is to have the simplest, most monosyllabic name you can find.
Yeah.
You know, drive.
Yeah.
Weirdly childish.
Grinder,
as well.
and so on.
Those are the three apps.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, and at some point it was like, okay, install, yeah, that's what it does. Shield? Why is it shield? Wizard.
I love the that piece of technology is so old and it's so weird that everyone uses the same company's thing because it has bizarre quirks where for like 8 years or something, every time you installed a game, you say like, okay, C:/Diablo, and I would say, oh, C:/Diablo doesn't exist. Are you sure you want to create it? Fucking yes, that's what the whole purpose of this thing is. This is an application designed to install an application I don't have. Like, if I already had it, it would be weird for me to be using it. The default thing should be, yes, of course I want to create the thing.
It's a shit wizard, I'll tell you that.
Like, we're an install shield wizard, and my first question is, wait, you want to install this thing? You don't already have this thing? What's going on?
I love the kind of indignant attitude of it. This doesn't exist.
Yeah. What are you thinking?
How very dare you?
Why didn't you create this ahead of time?
Yeah. Good. Well,
you still have those to this day.
Should have been
modern software
install
applications.
shield rational scientist. Someone who'd understand.
Install shield Richard Dawkins.
Install shield weirdly backward idiot.
It's going to be a difficult process, but you'll get there in the end.
Install shield dad.
What was it shielding us from?
I don't know.
Not installing it.
I don't know.
I'm protected from the horrors of not having this.
Of antivirus. I understand that metaphor, right?
Yeah, but I don't think viruses were a huge thing back then, were they?
No, but like install shield, like, were they shielding us from a wizard? Was that the whole point?
You might have heard the install wizard. He's gone rampant. Exactly. We are going to check that you've got this directory, and if you don't have it, we're going to ask you if you want to create it.
Don't trust that wizard. He will let you put it anywhere. Sorry.
Fuck that install wizard.
Don't fuck him. That's the whole point of the shield. Like, anyway.
Shield that install wizard.
I think we may have run out of questions. And
let's hope so.
And podcast.
You can send us questions at crateandcrowbar.com. You can write them on our forum, crateandcrowbar.com/forum. You can tweet them at us. We are at Crate and Crowbar on Twitter. And you can also follow us individually. I am I, Tom Francis, am at Pentadact, Pentadact. Who are you, Tom Senior?
I, Tom Senior, am at PCT Ludo, which is LUDO.
Who are you, Chris Thurston?
CTHURSTEN. Did we mention Discord?
Oh, no, we haven't, but we could. Let's do that. You can also join us in our Discord place where we talk sometimes, and other people also talk. That's in the sidebar on our website, wherever
I've got to say, Tom, damn, you bring the best booze.
I thought you were going to compliment my hosting abilities, but I thought, no, that can't be right.
Oh, good. Anyway,
thank you for listening,
everybody.
everybody.